If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 46, Choosing the Next Story. That night, Haruto once again found himself binge-watching anime in a fully immersive haze. Just like last time, Shiori was never very focused when she did things. The series was barely a dozen episodes long, yet she watched only 2 or 3 before declaring it boring. Not long after, she went back to endlessly scrolling short videos and chatting with the friend who had recommended the show. "This anime you recommended is so boring. The female lead is a ghost and the male lead is human. What's even interesting about that? A human ghost romance is way too cliché." Her friend replied patiently, "The early part is mostly set up. It introduces the relationships and background. This show is a slow burn type. Later on it becomes really warm and emotional. You have to endure the calm beginning to get the payoff when the feelings finally explode. Is it really that good?" Shiori typed back. "Maybe I should ask a few other people I know. If they all say it's warm and healing, I'll keep watching." "Don't," her friend immediately warned. "You know how spoiler-heavy people are these days. I'm the only one who sincerely recommends good stuff without spoiling it. If you ask others, someone might just tell you the ending outright. Can you handle that?" "True," Shiori admitted. "Alright then. I'll keep going. With such a high rating, there's probably a turning point later." After chatting for a while longer, Shiori shut down her computer and went to sleep. Haruto understood her perfectly. This was just a temporary pause. As long as she started the series, she would definitely finish it someday. The only uncertainty was when she would get around to it. Pulling himself out of the dreamlike memories, Haruto slowly opened his eyes. He fell into deep thought. In the dream, Shiori's memories only covered up to the 3rd episode. From Haruto's perspective, those 3 episodes were not bad at all. The story began by introducing a withdrawn, listless high school boy living a stagnant daily life. Almost immediately after, something strange was inserted into that routine. A girl in a white dress suddenly appeared. At first, the story did not clearly state that the girl was a ghost. Instead, it used subtle details. The male lead, Hinta, could see her, while everyone else ignored her existence completely. Gradually, Haruto understood. Not only that, she was Hinta's childhood friend, a girl who had drowned and died several years ago. For some unknown reason, she suddenly reappeared by his side in the form of a spirit that only he could see. In the parallel world, this kind of setup might be fairly common. After all, that world had no shortage of stories involving human ghost romance, relationships with supernatural beings, and even works where people married spirits or had children with them. But here, this kind of premise still felt relatively fresh. That said, the early part of Anohana did feel a little plain. The first episode showed Hinta's reunion with Menma, the gradual reappearance of their childhood group of friends, and how those once inseparable companions had drifted apart after Menma's drowning. It focused heavily on family, friendship, and fractured bonds, layered with the supernatural element of a ghost heroine. Haruto did not find it boring, but when he thought about it carefully, there was a clear difference compared to Blue Spring Ride. Blue Spring Ride was gripping almost every episode. If it stopped suddenly at any point, it left you restless and desperate for more. The first 3 episodes of Anohana did not give him that feeling. Looking back, Haruto could not really find any flaws. If someone asked whether it was good, he would still say yes. But the hook, the immediate pull, was weaker. "Slow burn, hey," Haruto murmured, glancing at the morning sunlight creeping in through the window. Everything he knew about Anohana came solely from Shiori's fragmented memories. He was certain of one thing. In the parallel world, an anime that so many people watched and rated so highly could not possibly be mediocre. Which meant that what made it truly special had not appeared yet. Just like Shiori's friend had said, its brilliance likely lay in the later episodes. Perhaps around episode 7 or 8, all the foreshadowing would detonate, and the emotional weight would come crashing down. "Warm and healing in the later part," Haruto repeated quietly, recalling those words. He thought for a moment, then smiled wryly. "So what if it's a gamble? People have to take risks. I don't know exactly how the later plot unfolds, but that world's content review standards are far stricter than ours, so there shouldn't be anything problematic. Worst case, it'll be like the Blue Spring Ride. When the timing is right, Shiori's memories will probably get triggered by my mental state or pressure, and the rest will surface naturally." Haruto made his decision quickly. Shiori's soul memories were a priceless treasure, but they were not something he could control at will. It was like drawing from a gacha. Last time, he pulled Blue Spring Ride. This time, he pulled Anohana. In between, he had also drawn countless worthless fragments that held no usable value at all. That was just how randomness worked. You could not expect every draw to perfectly match your desires in every aspect. Now it was already April. In just over a month, he would have to compete for the 2 open serialization slots in Crimson Maple magazine. There was no time left to hesitate. If no other extraordinary masterpiece emerged from Shiori's memories in the meantime, then his next work would be Anohana. A new week began. That Wednesday, the final chapter of yesterday's Starlight was successfully published. Reina's writing talent was fully demonstrated in this novel. In general, writing an interesting beginning was not particularly difficult. Engaging characters, appealing setups, and intriguing worlds were abundant in existing works for authors to learn from. But writing a good ending was exponentially harder. It required the entire narrative to remain stable, character development to stay consistent, and the conclusion to deliver something both satisfying and unexpected. Reina achieved all of that. In Chapter 13, she even elevated the antagonist's characterization with a few concise strokes. Many readers felt their eyes sting and their noses ache when they reached the final scenes. That was rare. Not only did the novel avoid a weak ending, but in its final chapter, it continued to refine its themes and push its message to the highest possible point within a limited word count. The result was strong reader feedback and solid market performance. Readers could always tell how much care an author put into their work. That day, on Crimson Maple Literature's official forum, many fans of yesterday's Starlight finally emerged from lurking and began to speak up in support of the novel. Chapter 47, Final Chapters, Fan Support and New Goals. Finished. Congratulations! It's over. Yesterday's Starlight has been with me for 2 whole months. Thankfully, this new author, Eri, really held it together. I was honestly scared she wouldn't manage to properly close all the foreshadowing. I hope Volume 2 of the paperback comes out soon. I already want to buy it and keep it. I don't know when Eri-sensei's next work will be released, but I'm officially a loyal fan now. Honestly, looking back now, yesterday's Starlight was still a bit immature in places. But compared to other light novels, veteran readers can tell that from Chapter 1 to Chapter 13, whether it's the plot or the prose, there's a growing sense of vitality and individuality. A lot of light novel authors can rely on experience, technique, and sheer volume of reading to write something that average readers can enjoy all the way through. But novels like that become boring once you've read too many. Yesterday's Starlight is different. You can clearly feel that the author deliberately avoided formulaic storytelling and genuinely wanted to write something in her own style from start to finish. That might be why, even though it only ranked 3rd in Fleeting Blossoms, its paperback sales were still so strong. As long as Eri keeps this creative state, her future is bright. I've been reading novels for 20 years. I don't know how to write, but I know how to judge. I'm calling it now. Once Eri matures, her achievements won't be low. Wishing Eri-sensei massive success with her next work. One book to fame across the country. Putting everything else aside, next time let's use that Shiori Takahashi as a sacrificial blade first. They're both students from Minamijo 3rd High School, around the same age, and both rumored to be beautiful girl authors. Yesterday's Starlight and Blue Spring Ride even started serialization in the same issue of the same magazine. From Chapter 1 until now, yesterday's Starlight has always been suppressed by Blue Spring Ride, and I've been annoyed about it the whole time. Same here. Really annoyed. Next time, all of us Eri fans need to unite and crush Shiori Takahashi's fanbase. The title of Minamijo 3rd High's #1 light novel author needs to change hands. On the day yesterday's Starlight concluded, a flood of comments appeared on Crimson Maple Literature's official platform. That night, Reina sat alone in her room, quietly staring at the screen filled with messages of encouragement and support from her readers. Her expression remained cool and calm as ever, but inside her chest, it felt as though a blazing fire had been lit. At the beginning, writing novels had probably just been driven by curiosity and a faint stirring of emotion. She herself had never really thought about how long she would write or how far she would go. But now, seeing so many people supporting her, a warm and complicated feeling welled up in her heart. She did not want to lose. She did not want to disappoint those who believed in her. That emotion completely occupied her mind at this moment. In that instant, Haruto's calm and confident face surfaced in her thoughts. Some people aim for fame and fortune, high positions, great wealth, and a perfect life. For a long time, Reina herself had also been working toward self-improvement, aiming to become a top-tier elite in society once she grew up. The specific industry did not matter. What mattered was achieving that title of elite. Only that label was worthy of her talent and ability. That was why she learned everything. School subjects went without saying, but also piano, painting, flower arrangement, etiquette, golf, skiing, and various competitions. Yet deep down, she knew she had never truly found joy in any of it. She was simply following a set path, striving and working hard for the sake of an elite life. In truth, that was also a form of confusion. When ordinary people do not know what they want, they give up and drift aimlessly. When geniuses do not know what they want, they learn everything and excel at everything. Even if they do not know how those skills will be used in the future, at least they are not wasting time. But now, on this night when yesterday's starlight had ended, the emotions rising within her pierced through that long-standing confusion. They told her clearly that at this moment, the goal she valued most was to create outstanding work and completely defeat Haruto. The day after Chapter 13 of yesterday's Starlight was published, all of its final statistics in Fleeting Blossoms were released. Overall rating, 8.9, second place in the magazine. Reader votes for this issue, 5,681, also second place. Meanwhile, Blue Spring Ride maintained its 9.5 rating and remained firmly in first place, with 10,989 reader votes, also first. No one had expected that two works submitted by complete newcomers would, 2 months later, occupy the top 2 spots in both ratings and votes in Fleeting Blossoms. But this was the end of the road for yesterday's Starlight. Even with the boost from its finale, the gap between it and Blue Spring Ride remained substantial. Over the course of 2 months, Reina's writing quality steadily improved with every installment, from Chapter 1 to Chapter 13. Yet even after the final chapter was published, even though her results surpassed every other author in Fleeting Blossoms, she still could not surpass the fellow newcomer serialized alongside her, Shiori Takahashi. For a while, many editors at Crimson Maple Literature could not help but sigh over it. Haruto knew nothing about the turbulence in Reina's heart over these days. He did not even realize that he had become her new target. After all, the two of them had not seen each other for 2 weeks. Class 3 and Class 7 were in different buildings. Even wandering the hallways during breaks, there was no chance of them brushing past one another. These days, Haruto had been focused entirely on figuring out how to adapt Anohana from an anime into a light novel. But when the weekend arrived, he temporarily put that work aside, because this day was also the release date of Blue Spring Ride's final chapter. Unlike yesterday's Starlight's conclusion 4 days earlier, Blue Spring Ride's finale drew responses not only from local readers but also from fans in other prefectures, who flocked to Crimson Maple's forums to comment. At this point, the first volume of Blue Spring Ride had surpassed 320,000 copies sold. Within the prefecture, its popularity and sales had reached a level where, even compared to strong titles serialized in Fleeting Blossoms, or even against works in top-tier magazines, it did not lose out, despite its weaker promotional resources. In terms of reputation and fan loyalty, none of the serialized works in those 5 magazines could clearly surpass Blue Spring Ride. That 9.5 rating was unique among all mainstream light novel magazines in the prefecture. Even the most popular works in other magazines usually hovered between 8.6 and 9.0. Still, no matter how outstanding a work was, fan enthusiasm rose quickly and faded just as fast. Blue Spring Ride was excellent, but it was impossible for it to remain unforgettable to readers for a long time. Within a few days, discussions about the ending dropped by more than half. 2 weeks later, most local readers had already shifted their attention to other strong titles on the market. Of course, by late April, promotional campaigns for Volume 2 of both Blue Spring Ride and yesterday's Starlight officially began. Thanks to the outstanding performance of their first volumes, Crimson Maple Literature invested heavily in promoting the second volume scheduled for early May. As a result, both works saw their popularity rise again toward the end of April. However, Haruto and Reina had already shifted their focus entirely to their next projects. April 25, Minamijo 3rd High School. Haruto walked out of the school gate, preparing to head home. Not far from the entrance, he spotted a familiar figure. Beneath a black and white school skirt were long, straight, slender legs. Her hair reached her waist, and her fair, delicate face carried a hint of nervous guilt. Standing near the roadside, using the reflection in a shop's glass door, Reina saw Haruto exit the school. She naturally turned her head toward the school gate, pretending to notice him by chance, then showed a surprised expression and spoke up first. Haruto. What a coincidence. Chapter 48, An awkward reunion with a rival. When Reina called out to him, Haruto froze for a beat. Then his expression returned to its usual calm, and he gave her a small, polite smile. Reina. Reina Fujimoto? Hey, it's been a while. Did you come over to say hi because you needed something? Hearing his tone and seeing how unbothered he looked, Reina felt an inexplicable spark of irritation flare in her chest. To her, Haruto was no longer just a classmate from another building. He was the rival who had tormented her for nearly 3 months. At school, at home, late at night, even while studying, her thoughts always circled the same question. What would Haruto write next? What direction would he take? How good would his new work be? Would it surpass Blue Spring Ride? Or would it fall short? A whole month had passed since she last saw him, yet the name Haruto had surfaced in her mind countless times every single day. She had assumed that after meeting at Yukino's place dozens of times, and after playing over 100 matches against each other, their relationship should have shifted into something more familiar. Just like how she and Yukino had somehow become friends through those meetings. So surely, through that same time together, she and Haruto counted as half-friends at least, even if they were also fierce competitors. And yet, despite being in the same school, separated by just one teaching building, despite the fact that walking from class 7 to class 3 took 3 minutes if you moved quickly, Haruto had not sought her out once in a full month. He had not brought up writing even a single time. Today, she had come here, deliberately staging an accidental encounter just so she could talk to him, and this was the attitude she got? She had been treating him like a rival. But it felt like he did not even see her that way. Can't I greet you unless I have a reason? Reina Fujimoto's voice stayed cool, but there was a faint, unmistakable resentment underneath it. Haruto chuckled. Of course you can. He continued walking down the street, and Reina immediately matched his pace, moving alongside him at a distance of about a meter. How's your progress in the game? Haruto suddenly asked. The sunset dyed the street in warm orange light. In the evening breeze, Reina's soft hair fluttered lightly along her shoulder, and the side of her pale face seemed outlined with a thin golden edge. Not great, Reina replied, stiffening slightly. Truthfully, she did not care much about games. What she cared about was defeating Haruto. That two-player duel game, True Iron Soul, without an opponent, held far less appeal for her than a set of challenging math problems. Oh, I see. Haruto nodded solemnly, as though he were delivering a lecture. If you want to improve, you can't practice on and off. You have to reflect on yourself, refine your technique, pursue the limit, and never slack. Otherwise, if you always quit halfway, it's hard to achieve anything. He gave her a full-blown motivational speech, clearly dissatisfied that his so-called student had started treating training so casually without his supervision. Reina felt something hot rise inside her. Since childhood, nobody had ever spoken to her like this, the way people scold underachievers. Hearing him go on and on, she suddenly asked. So after Blue Spring Ride ended, have you just been playing games this whole time? The words slipped out before she could stop them, because his lecture made her picture him as a full-on gaming addict. Sometimes, Haruto answered. Reina quietly let out a breath of relief. At least he was not completely lost. At least he still understood that writing mattered more than wasting time. Then the rest of the time you've been working on your new novel? She asked, trying to sound casual. Not really. Haruto sighed like someone finally freed from a long prison sentence. When I'm not gaming, I've mostly been watching anime. Sometimes movies. Sometimes short videos. I'll watch people fishing, chopping wood, cooking, or skipping stones. During serialization I had to write drafts every night, so after the ending, I kind of relaxed. Reina stopped in place. For the first time, her steady expression shifted, and emotion seeped into her voice. Then what about your new work? My new work? Haruto repeated, as if thinking. Last week, I spent about a week and wrote the first 3 chapters. Reina's chest tightened. A week? He had only seen the first 3 episodes of that anime he was adapting from Shiori's memories, and submitting to an editorial meeting only required the first 3 chapters anyway. So once he decided on the project, he had simply worked quickly and converted the plot into a novel format. But to Reina, what she heard was something else entirely. "A week," she said slowly, voice turning sharper. "Are you saying you went from concept to draft, and you wrote 3 chapters in 1 week?" "More or less," Haruto answered instinctively. Then he immediately realized what he had done. She was not a random reader. She was a fellow light novel author. She knew the process. She knew what that kind of speed implied. If he did not want to sound abnormal, he could not keep blurting out the truth. "Ahem, I mean, not exactly." He laughed a little too quickly. "I thought about it for a long time. I just spent 1 week actually writing out what I'd already planned." His tone carried a hint of guilt. And Reina caught it. Her eyes widened slightly. So he really was treating his new work with this kind of careless attitude? In her mind, she saw herself over the last month. Daydreaming during class to construct plot threads. Studying writing theory late into the night. Building a world, outlining arcs, creating settings. Pretending to sleep at midnight to fool her parents, then hiding under the blanket with a flashlight, researching and planning. Over 100,000 words of discarded drafts piled up. Even more ideas had been rejected inside her head, thrown away before they ever touched paper. She had been sleeping so little that she had started using breaks at school just to catch up. And Haruto? What was he doing? "Haruto," she said, voice steady but edged with real anger, "if you keep acting like this, your next work might be surpassed by mine." Yet even then, she did not see the reaction she expected in his eyes. He looked calm. Almost as if it did not matter to him. And Reina realized something, perhaps for the first time. Haruto truly had never considered her an enemy. To him, she was simply another author who happened to serialize in the same magazine. He did not build his life around rivals. If he did, he would exhaust himself. But that was exactly what made her feel even worse. She did not want to defeat a careless Haruto. She wanted to defeat the version of him who had fought with everything he had, who had struggled until he produced the best work he was capable of at this stage of his life. Only then, if she crushed him, would it feel like a real victory. If she beat a novel written in a week, what would it even mean? On the other hand, Haruto did not believe that every popular work from that other world would automatically dominate in this world. For him, the joy of being a light novel author was sharing stories from another world with readers here. Sales, income, reputation, he valued those things too. If he could pursue them, he would not slack off. But he also did not want to let those things drive him into obsession. From what he could tell, Anohana probably had emotional explosions later on, but he did not know how big they were. He also did not know whether the story would land perfectly with readers in this world. It was entirely possible that his new work could lose to Reina's next novel. After thinking seriously about what she said, Haruto nodded with complete sincerity. Yet, he sounded almost gentle. For most people, failure runs through life from start to finish. I probably won't be an exception either. If I lose, then I lose. Chapter 49, Rivalry clarified and determination set. So if you lose, you lose. How could he say something like that so easily? Wouldn't losing hurt? Wouldn't it be painful? Or was it that he had already grown used to failure, so numb that it no longer mattered? But with that level of talent in writing, how could he possibly have such an attitude? Reina stopped walking. The cool composure on her face faded by more than half, replaced by a kind of anger that had nowhere to go, leaving her cheeks faintly flushed. Her emotions surged. She wanted to say something, anything, but what could she say? Haruto was free. If he wanted to slack off, that was his choice. All right, I'm home. I'll head in now, Haruto said, pointing toward the apartment complex he had recently moved into. Your home, wasn't it somewhere you had to take the train to get to? Reina started, then stopped. That place was sealed by the court because of my father's debts, Haruto said with a smile. I can't go back there anymore. He turned and walked toward the complex. After taking 2 steps, he paused, turned back, and smiled at her again. Reina, I may not be as smart as you, but I'm not that clueless either. I can roughly sense how you see me. After all, when Blue Spring Ride and yesterday's Starlight ended, yesterday's Starlight ranked second in both score and votes in Fleeting Blossoms, while Blue Spring Ride took first in both. Reina looked at him silently. If the gap were several ranks, it probably wouldn't matter much, Haruto continued. I've never felt frustrated just because my test scores were worse than the top student in class. After all, I'm usually near the bottom. But when you're just one rank away from being number one, he said calmly, if that were me, I'd definitely feel unwilling to accept it. You want to take revenge on me with your next novel, right? After playing so many games together, I have a pretty good idea what kind of person you are. The more you lose, the more you want to win. Reina stared at Haruto, who stood a few meters away, smiling faintly, completely at ease. From their first meeting in the elevator at Crimson Maple Literature until now, she had known him for 4 months. Finally, he understood her. Finally, he noticed her existence. At that moment, a wave of indescribable emotion welled up from deep inside her chest. Her nose stung slightly. But, Haruto added gently, my new work probably won't be that easy to beat. He spoke as softly as he could. After all, they had spent more than 2 months together. He did feel a certain fondness for her, his former game student. He was simply giving her a precaution, so that if his new work really did have some unexpected brilliance later on and she lost again, it would not hurt quite as much. Haruto meant it sincerely. There was no mockery in his words. But to Reina, the earlier sense of warmth vanished instantly. In her ears, Haruto's sentence, my new work probably won't be that easy to beat, had already been automatically translated into, you have no chance of winning against me. This was the difference in how people with different personalities interpreted the same words. Her fist clenched. Too arrogant. Far too arrogant. But the loser, even a temporary one, had no way to refute such words. Anything she said would only sound like powerless rage in the eyes of the winner. After hearing Reina let out a strange laugh that did not fit her usual image at all, Haruto slung his bag over his shoulder and walked straight ahead without looking back. Under the setting sun, her fighting spirit burned intensely. Shaking his head, Haruto headed home. He could tell that Reina had a strong competitive drive toward him, but he had never realized just how intense it was. April passed quietly. In early May, the second volumes of Blue Spring Ride and yesterday's Starlight were released as scheduled. By now, the first volume of Blue Spring Ride had surpassed 400,000 copies sold. Thanks to strong support from readers outside the prefecture, its sales growth in the later stage exceeded expectations. As for the second volume of Blue Spring Ride, because Crimson Maple Literature treated it as a top-tier release, its sales improved noticeably compared to the first volume. First week sales reached 210,000 copies, instantly claiming first place on the prefectural light novel single-volume sales ranking in early May. Tankban sales were a key indicator of a novel's performance. The most important metric was average sales per volume. Light novels varied greatly in length. Comparing the total sales of a 20-volume series to a 2-volume series was obviously unfair. Average volume sales, however, told a different story, though they required a longer time span to calculate. That was why, for newly released volumes, people usually judged success by weekly and per-volume sales. And Blue Spring Ride Volume 2 ranked first in single-volume sales among all new releases in the prefecture during the first week of May. Even though the novel had ended a month ago, its fan loyalty remained strong. Yesterday's Starlight Volume 2, meanwhile, sold over 80,000 copies and placed 9th on the weekly chart. These sales figures were officially recorded in the author profiles of Shiori Takahashi and Eri. Then, on Monday, May 8, both Haruto and Reina received a message from Yukino. Wednesday. Bring your new manuscripts and come to my place. Both of them felt their hearts skip a beat. They knew exactly what it meant for Yukino to contact them at a time like this. Vacancies had opened up for new serializations in Crimson Maple. That evening, after returning home, Reina locked her bedroom door, pulled out a document envelope hidden in a corner of her bookshelf, and took out a thick stack of densely written manuscript pages. The concept for her new novel had started forming 2 months ago, and she had begun writing a month earlier. Over this long period, she had revised it again and again, scrutinizing even a single word or sentence with extreme care. Holding the manuscript in her hands, she felt excitement mixed with anxiety. The future was always full of unknowns. Haruto, after getting home, took out the first 3 chapters of Anohana and read through them twice. To be honest, he was nervous too. But what made him uneasy was not what the later plot might reveal, or whether there would be some stunning development. What worried him was that the early plot might not be exciting enough. Would it pass the serialization meeting? On Wednesday, after school, both Haruto and Reina prepared themselves. They did not leave the school together, but when they reached the train station, they noticed each other almost simultaneously. Since their chance encounter on the road, they had barely spoken for more than 2 weeks. "Hey," Haruto greeted her first this time. But Reina's attention was not on him. It was on the document envelope in his hand. "That is his new novel." Half an hour later, the two arrived at Yukino's apartment complex, entered the elevator with practiced ease, and went up to her place. "You're here." As soon as they stepped inside, they saw Yukino sitting upright on the sofa, waiting for them. She wore a black office outfit, her hair tied into a neat bun, with a loose strand falling by her ear. Her beautiful face looked serious as she studied the data report in her hands. She seemed far more like a professional editor than her usual relaxed self. "It's been over a month since I last saw you two," Yukino said after looking them over carefully, then smiled. "You really haven't changed at all. Honestly, I'm kind of hurt. The novel's ended, and you could have come over as friends, but neither of you showed up even once," she added jokingly. "That's because we didn't want to disturb your rest," Reina said softly. "You're usually very busy." "Excuses. All excuses." After teasing them briefly, Yukino's expression turned serious. "All right. You know why I called you here today, so I won't waste words. I'll get straight to the point. Next week, Crimson Maple will open a competition for 2 serialization slots. 2 weeks after that, there will be another slot. That means 3 serialization slots will be decided at the same meeting next Monday, because the schedule is tight." Haruto and Reina's expressions sharpened. "But," Yukino continued, "the competition is fierce. As far as I know, at least 10 veteran authors from this prefecture with strong past results are eyeing this meeting." Chapter 50, Volume 2 Success and the Road to the Next Battle. "I won't mention their real names," Yukino said calmly. "I'll just talk about their pen names. They're all well known in the Minamijo light novel scene, so if you read regularly, you should have heard of them. For example, Nanto. He's been working with our publisher for over 10 years and has produced multiple hit series. Just in terms of novels with an average volume sales figure exceeding 200,000 copies, he has written 3 over the years. Then there's Tori. He's a light novel author who rose to prominence in recent years and has also written a work with average volume sales above 200,000. And there's also Teu. He used to collaborate mainly with Blue Sky Publishing, but after his contract expired last year, he got in touch with one of our editors. 4 years ago, he was even rated as one of Minamijo's top 10 most popular novelists of the year. That was his peak, though. Things went downhill after that, but even so, a camel is still bigger than a horse when it's thin. His fanbase is still enormous." Yukino slowly listed the names of the authors participating in this round of competition. For a magazine at the level of Crimson Maple, once a work began serialization, as long as its popularity did not decline significantly, the author would usually stretch it out for as long as possible. After all, as long as a novel ran in this magazine, even the minimum manuscript fee was close to 2 million yen. No one would argue with money. As long as they could keep writing, they would gladly continue. At the same time, serialization standards for this magazine were extremely strict. If a novel's popularity failed to meet the benchmarks, the publisher would immediately intervene, either cutting it short or transferring it to a lower-tier magazine to finish. Even so, having 3 serialization slots open within a span of 1 or 2 weeks was rare, which explained why so many popular Minamijo authors were paying close attention. "Don't look so tense," Yukino said quickly when she saw their serious expressions. "Those people are all famous writers in Minamijo, sure, but you two aren't inferior either. The debut results for both of you were honestly outstanding. Haruto, if nothing unexpected happens, Blue Spring Ride will have an average volume sales figure exceeding 500,000 copies. Among the dozen or so authors competing this time, purely in terms of past performance, you rank first. And Reina, yesterday's Starlight will very likely reach an average of 200,000 copies per volume as well. Compared to them, that's not weak at all." As Yukino spoke, she could not help feeling emotional herself. Who were the people she had just mentioned? They were all writers who had been active on the front lines of the light novel industry in Minamijo for over a decade. Every one of them had struggled in the field for many years to reach their current standing. And yet Haruto and Reina had debuted only a few months ago. If the editors at the serialization meeting judged purely by an author's historical performance, these two were not at a disadvantage at all. In fact, they held a clear edge. A genius who became famous with a single book naturally carried a halo effect. What publisher did not like youthful prodigies? Especially Haruto. With Blue Spring Ride's average volume sales almost guaranteed to surpass 500,000 copies, that figure alone was staggering. To be honest, among the 14 novels currently serialized in Crimson Maple, only 1 or 2 had ever reached that level after their tankman release. But, Yukino continued, changing her tone, past achievements belong to the past. When 2 novels are roughly equal in quality, the editorial department may consider an author's history. But if your new work is clearly inferior compared to your competitors, then no amount of past glory will help. She looked directly at the two of them. In the light novel industry, the ones who truly decide your fate are the readers, not editors like us. Readers don't care how impressive your history is. I understand, Reina said. I get it, Haruto said, nodding as well. Good. Then hand me your new manuscripts for review. 2 months later, Haruto and Reina once again took out the game console at Yukino's apartment. This time, however, their attention was not on the game at all. From start to finish, their focus stayed fixed on Yukino. Their matches were full of mistakes, completely lacking their usual sharpness. After all, Yukino was the first reader of their new novels. Star Sea was the title of Reina Fujimoto's new work. Like yesterday's Starlight, it was a fantasy adventure novel blended with romance, and the genre was very similar. A chosen girl. A starry ocean appeared in her dreams. Fragments tied to saving the world. Looking only at the elements, nothing stood out as especially novel. To be honest, coming up with a truly original concept in terms of genre or setting had become extremely difficult. Over the years, most interesting ideas had already been explored by earlier authors. Later writers could at best dress old wine in new bottles. But while setting mattered, what truly determined whether a novel was engaging was character writing. And Star Sea. In terms of setting, it could only be said to have some freshness. But when it came to character portrayal, the improvement compared to yesterday's Starlight was obvious at a glance. After finishing the first chapter, Yukino felt her nose sting. She took a deep breath before recovering. Killing off 2 characters in the first chapter alone, the heroine's mother and the heroine's close friend, Reina really showed no mercy. Yet at the same time, waves stirred in Yukino's heart. This girl is terrifying, she thought. This is only her second novel. How are her characters already this deep? And these cliffhangers? Who did she learn them from? Why does it feel so much like Haruto's style? Suppressing her restless thoughts, Yukino continued reading. 20 minutes later, she had finished the first 3 chapters of Star Sea. After a minute of contemplation, she let out a long breath of relief. One word surfaced in her mind. Solid. The setting, the plot, the pacing, the character development. Everything felt sharp and engaging. If yesterday's Starlight still showed traces of inexperience, with a few pitfalls typical of newcomers, then in this work, Yukino could hardly find any. During serialization, Reina had not read the reader comments on the official forum for nothing. No one was born knowing everything. Writing was the same. Some pitfalls only became obvious after readers rejected them. But for someone with true talent, even a small amount of negative feedback was enough to extrapolate and produce a story that readers could not put down. Unlike Haruto, Reina had kept multiple notebooks of writing and reading notes based on reader feedback during yesterday's Starlight's run. From Yukino's perspective, her growth was genuinely shocking. She had entered the industry barely 4 or 5 months ago. Was this what a true light novel genius looked like? Without pause, Yukino immediately picked up Haruto's new manuscript. Anohana, the flower we saw that day. Yukino blinked. This. What kind of title was that? Chapter 51, a slow burn manuscript and a risky bet. You really cannot judge a person by their appearance, and you certainly cannot judge a light novel by its title. Yukino's expression stiffened for only a fleeting moment before she pulled herself together and focused her full attention on the plot unfolding before her. The protagonist of the story was a high school boy named Hinta Yadomi, often called Hinton. He was a social dropout who spent his days skipping school and wasting his life away on video games. He was a complete failure by every social standard, yet his life took a sudden turn on a day like any other when he encountered the spirit of his childhood friend, Meiko Hanma, who had died years ago. The first chapter of the novel dedicated a significant amount of space to establishing the domestic environments of both Hinta and Meiko. It portrayed Hinta's family as being completely at their wits' end with him, depicting his listless worldview and his refusal to take responsibility for anything in his life. Reading it made Yukino's blood boil with frustration. On the other hand, the depiction of Meiko, or Menma, was heart-wrenchingly adorable. She was portrayed as a petite, innocent girl in a white dress who understood very little about the world, yet she possessed a knack for saying exactly what was needed to warm a reader's heart. Although she had been dead for several years, she discovered upon returning home that her family was still deeply mired in the grief of her passing. While her father remained stoic and her younger brother's sorrow had begun to fade into a dull ache, it was clear that her mother had never truly moved on. At every single meal, the mother would still prepare a bowl of rice and set aside portions of food for her deceased daughter. "Can you please stop doing that? You set a place for her at every meal, and I can't stand looking at it." "Dead people don't eat," her younger brother muttered, never looking up from his phone. "Don't speak like that. Your sister was always so airhead that she might not even realize she's dead yet." "We have to feed her," the mother replied, her eyes welling with tears as she stared at the photograph of the girl. "I actually do know," Menma said as she stood right in the middle of her family. Her face wore a smile, but her voice was thick with suppressed sobs. "I know that I'm already dead." The father continued reading his newspaper, the brother kept eating, and the mother gazed at the memorial photo to find some connection to the past. Their family member was right there in the room with them, yet they could not see her. No one could hear the words she spoke. She stood directly in front of them, but she was completely unable to communicate with those she loved most. In the entire world, the only person who could see her and hear her voice was the protagonist, Hinta. As Yukino reached this point, she felt a sudden, sharp tightness in her chest. People often claimed that the early chapters of Anohana were a slow burn, but that did not mean the initial plot lacked impact. While much of the early narrative was dedicated to laying the groundwork and building an atmosphere to slowly stir the reader's emotions, the story had a way of catching people off guard. A single line of dialogue or a brief scene could utterly shatter a reader's defenses in less than 10 seconds. Naturally, most of these emotional highlights centered on the heroine. The characterization of the female lead in this work was nothing short of flawless. However, she realized why many people found the beginning of the story somewhat lacking in magnetism. The issue was not the plot itself, but rather the protagonist. The original character design for the male lead was almost too mundane. He lacked any special powers, he possessed no extraordinary charisma, and he showed no signs of brilliant intellect. He was simply an ordinary person. He had been a cheerful boy in his youth, but the trauma of his friend's death had turned him into a shut-in who had wasted his life from elementary school through high school. The only thing that made him special in the context of this story was the fact that the heroine loved him and that he was the only one who could perceive her ghost. Beyond that, there was nothing. When people read the story, they would find the heroine charming and the childhood friends relatable, but the protagonist lacked any real opportunity to shine early on. He was often in a subordinate position, even being looked down upon by his old friends. For readers trying to immerse themselves in the protagonist's perspective, the experience could feel quite tedious. Yukino was currently navigating this exact feeling. She liked the heroine more with every page she turned. As she read, she couldn't help but marvel at how Haruto could depict a female character with such depth. Menma was sweet, sensible, and deeply tragic. But as for the protagonist, to be honest, Yukino couldn't find any specific faults with him, but she couldn't help but feel that he didn't deserve the heroine's devotion. It felt like such a waste. Once she finished the first 3 chapters, Yukino looked up at the ceiling of her apartment and took a moment to reflect. She couldn't find any flaws in the writing. Hinta's lack of brilliance was offset by the fact that his actions after meeting Menma weren't actually annoying. Menma herself was incredibly captivating, and the conflict between Hinta and his childhood friends felt grounded in reality. "It just lacks a bit of a hook, Haruto," Yukino said after a pause, turning her gaze toward him. "The pacing is too slow. I've finished 3 chapters and I still don't even know what the main goal of this novel is." It felt like a romance, but not entirely. It touched on friendship, but it hadn't delved deep enough into that theme yet. She had no idea why Menma appeared only to Hinta or what her goal actually was. As a reader, Yukino was completely in the dark. "I know," Haruto replied. He had anticipated this reaction. He felt the same way himself, so it was only natural that a discerning editor like Yukino would notice it too. But that is simply the rhythm of this story. It's a very slow burn. When Haruto spoke, both Yukino and Reina turned to look at him. A very slow burn. Yukino looked confused. We are trying to compete for a serialization slot in Crimson Maple, which is the top magazine in the region. If you knew it was a slow burn, why would you write it this way? A serialized magazine was not a place where a creator could simply indulge themselves. The light novel industry was cutthroat. The reason an editorial department decided the fate of a series based on the very first chapter was because readers had very little patience. It wasn't that a slow burn was impossible, but a novel first had to survive the editorial meeting. If the story was too slow and failed to perform well immediately after serialization, it might be cancelled before the plot even had a chance to reach its climax. Yukino couldn't understand how Haruto could make such a fundamental mistake. Because it would be such a pity otherwise, Haruto said. He didn't know the full details of the story's later success in his previous world, but he knew that fans of the medium were picky everywhere. If this work could maintain such high ratings despite a slow start, the quality of the later content had to be exceptional. What do you mean by that? Yukino asked. I mean that I believe this work surpasses Blue Spring Ride in every conceivable way. If I gave up on it just because the beginning is slow, it would remain buried in my memory forever. That would be a tragedy, Haruto said with a smile. Both Yukino and Reina perked up at those words. Reina, in particular, stared at the manuscript in Yukino's hands as if it were a formidable enemy. Was he really that confident? It's not up to you to decide that, Yukino countered. If creators could accurately judge their own work, we wouldn't have movies that lose millions of dollars at the box office. Whether this novel is better than Blue Spring Ride isn't for you or me to decide. Only the readers can make that judgment. She pointed out that many famous authors had written total flops after they became successful. They must have been confident when they wrote them, otherwise they wouldn't have published them at all. It was always the market and the readers who eventually put them in their place. I understand your point. What I'm trying to say is that I believe this work will outperform Blue Spring Ride if it gets the chance to be serialized. Of course, that is just my personal opinion, Haruto said calmly. He knew he had to project confidence. If the author didn't believe in the work, no one else would. He didn't want Yukino to think he was just wasting her time with a half-hearted effort. I think there's no point in agonizing over this right now, Reina suddenly interrupted. I haven't read the manuscript, so I can't judge the story, but the editorial meeting for the Ascent of New Gods selection is coming up. You don't have enough time to ask Haruto for a completely different story. She looked at Yukino and continued. If you don't submit this, his chances of getting a slot are 0. If you do submit it, the chance is at least higher than 0. Yukino immediately understood. Unless she was prepared to let Haruto sit out this round of competition, she had only one choice. She had to submit the manuscript. Late that night, Haruto and Reina walked out of the apartment complex together. The night breeze was a bit chilly. Haruto noticed Reina crossing her arms slightly against the cold and considered offering her his jacket, but he hesitated, knowing her prickly personality. Instead, he stepped forward a few paces to block the wind for her. Why did you speak up for me back there? If my work wasn't at the meeting, you'd have one less person to compete with, Haruto asked. As the wind blew, the hem of Reina's school skirt fluttered and her hair turned into a chaotic mess. Her pale, beautiful face remained unmoved by the cold as she looked him in the eye. My goal is to defeat you fairly with my new work, Star C, not to win by default. Once your novel is submitted, the competition begins. If my work is chosen and yours is rejected because it's too slow, then I win. Even if we both get serialized, if your popularity flags because of the slow start while mine stays strong, I still win. She paused and then added, besides, Yukino would have figured that out eventually even if I hadn't said anything. You really are obsessed with winning and losing, Haruto remarked. I only care about competing with people and things that interest me. I'm not obsessed with everyone, she said, waving down an approaching taxi. But once I win this round, I'll be able to let go of this little rivalry. Before she got into the car, she turned back to look at him. Her profile was sharp and elegant, and her eyes were filled with an intense seriousness. The people I've overtaken in the past have never managed to catch up to me again. Once you become my subordinate, you stay my subordinate for life. With that confident declaration, she slipped into the taxi and drove away. Haruto watched the car disappear into the distance. For some reason, he felt a strange sense of amusement and joy. She really is an interesting person, he whispered to himself. Chapter 52, Editorial Politics and the Crimson Maple Meeting. It was May, and the early summer heat was already stifling. Even though everyone had transitioned to their lightest summer clothes, the humidity left people drenched in sweat. Despite the rising temperature outside, the atmosphere inside the Crimson Maple Literature headquarters was electric. The staff members in the editorial department were brimming with energy, showing no signs of the typical afternoon slump. After all, it was a rare occurrence for a premier magazine like Crimson Maple to have 3 serialization slots open up at the same time. Every editor was sharpening their knives and focusing their efforts on the upcoming Monday meeting. "Hey, Kenji," one editor whispered, leaning over a desk. "I heard that Red Dragon, the author you handle, is submitting a new pitch for the meeting this Monday. Is that true?" "Yeah, that's right," Kenji replied with a sigh. His historical fiction hasn't exactly set the world on fire lately, but with 3 slots open, I figured it was worth a shot. You never know when luck might strike. The opportunities are better than usual, sure, but the competition is going to be brutal, another colleague chimed in. Getting serialized in Crimson Maple means more than just a paycheck. It's prestige and wealth all rolled into one. Any series that manages to secure a spot in that magazine is practically guaranteed a fortune. Between royalties, tankobon sales, and merchandise, you're looking at millions of yen. When the average monthly salary for a fresh graduate is barely 200,000 yen, that kind of income is a massive draw even for established veterans. And that's not even counting the possibility of an anime or live-action adaptation. Then the sky's the limit. Exactly, the first editor agreed. Who would turn down that kind of money? If you can sustain a serialization for just 6 months, you're set for a while. If I had the talent, I'd be throwing my hat in the ring too. But honestly, a senior editor interrupted, whether it's authors like Nanto, Tori, Teo, or Red Dragon, none of them are actually the most dangerous contenders at this meeting. Then who is? It's Shiori Takahashi. Have you seen the numbers? The total sales for the first and second volumes of Blue Spring Ride have already surpassed 800,000 copies. The average sales per volume are over 400,000, and that number is still climbing every day. With a track record like that, he has a massive advantage. Most of the other competitors would be lucky to hit an average of 200,000 or 300,000 copies per volume. Don't get too ahead of yourself, someone cautioned. There's an old saying about precocious children not always growing into great adults. The light novel world is even more unforgiving. You don't need years to see a downfall, a single year is enough for a career to peak and crash. There are plenty of examples of authors who wrote a massive hit in the first half of the year, only to have their next pitch rejected because the quality just wasn't there. True, but you can't ignore the momentum of a creator who has reached those heights so quickly. He's incredibly young. While it's possible he's just a flash in the pan, it's much more likely that Blue Spring Ride was just his starting line. While the staff gossiped in the main office, Yukino Aoyama was inside the editor-in-chief's office giving a formal report to Akira. Akira was in her 40s, but she maintained a strict regimen of healthy eating and self-care. She looked vibrant and carried herself with an effortless elegance that commanded respect. She set down her teacup and looked directly at Yukino. "So, I take it that both of your talented rookies, Shiori and Eri, intend to compete in this serialization meeting?" "Yes, that's correct," Yukino replied. "Have you looked over their new works yet?" Akira asked. "I have. But, Chief..." Yukino trailed off, a hint of confusion crossing her face. Normally, Akira didn't pay much attention to pending submissions until the actual meeting began. "I'm still thinking about the Ascent of New Gods event coming up in the second half of the year," Akira said with a smile. "Originally, I thought these two geniuses might need another hit series under their belts to build up their resumes before they could be considered as top-tier candidates for the regional seeds. But as you know, both Blue Spring Ride and yesterday's Starlight have performed exceptionally well." She leaned back in her chair. "At the very least, compared to the rising stars from the other major publishing houses in the region, our two are not just keeping pace, they are leading the pack. Especially Shiori. Even though he hasn't had a series in a top-tier magazine like Crimson Maple yet, his popularity and volume sales put him in a league of his own among rookie authors. Participating in such events didn't bring any direct financial profit to Crimson Maple Literature. The copyrights for the works submitted to The Ascent of New Gods remained entirely with the authors, and the publisher couldn't lay claim to them. It was a talent search meant to highlight potential, and if the organizers tried to take the rights, the event would lose its credibility. Since the works weren't even serialized in the publisher's own magazine first, Crimson Maple didn't see a cent of the revenue. So why was Akira so invested in ensuring Haruto and Reina secured those seed spots? The answer was simple: prestige. If an author recommended by their house won a prestigious title, their name would be forever linked to Crimson Maple literature. The company could capitalize on the national buzz generated by the event to bolster its own reputation in the region. It proved that Crimson Maple was a place where new talent could thrive and surpass the veterans of other houses. It was the same logic as a university gaining prestige when one of its professors won a major international award. Because of this, Akira was keeping a very close eye on both of them. They were the only high-potential rookies the house currently had. She desperately wanted both of their new works to succeed in the upcoming meeting, as that would significantly boost their chances for the seed spots. So, tell me, Akira prompted. How are their new projects looking? Yukino remained silent for a few seconds. She could sense what Akira was thinking. She had been incredibly anxious about how Haruto's slow burn story, which he claimed would surpass his previous hit, would actually fare in the meeting. Now that the editor-in-chief was asking, this might be a golden opportunity. Eri's new work is excellent, Yukino began. Oh. Akira's interest was piqued. Based on the manuscript she submitted, I believe her new story, Star Sea, will significantly outperform her previous work, Yesterday's Starlight. Yukino began to praise Reina's work enthusiastically. Since Akira had asked, it was vital to create a strong positive impression. Come Monday, that initial bias might be the very thing that pushed Star Sea through the committee. After all, while the regular editors could voice their opinions, the final decision always rested with Akira. Once she finished talking up Star Sea, Yukino's eyes shifted slightly. She suppressed her inner guilt and forced herself to maintain a confident expression. As for Shiori's new work, Anohana, it is even more exceptional. Chapter 53, A Conditional Contract for Serialization. Akira turned her sharp gaze toward Yukino, waiting for a justification. Haruto has poured significantly more heart and soul into the creation of Anohana than he did for Blue Spring Ride. He actually began drafting this project well before his previous series concluded, and he frequently consulted me to discuss the plot beats and the intricate character settings, Yukino explained. She began to play up the immense effort Haruto had invested in his new work. If she were dealing with a mediocre author, Yukino would have been strictly professional and honest with Akira. If she overpromised on behalf of a writer who failed to deliver, she would be the one forced to shoulder the consequences alone. Although she did not rely on her editorial salary to survive, she took her career very seriously. Furthermore, since Akira was her senior and mentor, Yukino had no desire to deceive her without a very good reason. However, the track record of Blue Spring Ride was simply too dazzling to ignore. When Haruto had looked her in the eye and claimed that Anohana would eventually eclipse his first hit, she had voiced her doubts out of habit. Deep down, she was consumed by a burning curiosity because she wanted to see exactly how he intended to prove such a bold claim. Just as Haruto was gambling on the fact that Anohana had explosive potential in its later chapters, Yukino was now gambling on the idea that Haruto was a true genius rather than a one-hit wonder. She was betting that the story was merely a slow starter rather than a fundamental bore. That is quite enough of the fluff. Please stop telling me about his work ethic and give me the cold facts regarding the strengths and weaknesses of his new work, Akira interrupted. She could tell that Yukino was being uncharacteristically defensive. Yukino tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and straightened her posture as her expression turned professional. The characterization is superb, but I will not lie to you. It is a slow burn. According to Haruto, the first few chapters serve as a necessary foundation, and he promises a massive emotional payoff with a surge in narrative momentum further down the line. Akira's brow furrowed at the mention of the pacing. A slow burn? That is practically a death sentence for a weekly serialization in a flagship magazine like Crimson Maple. Our readers expect a hook on the very first page. Haruto is fully aware of that fact, yet he remains confident that the final results will surpass Blue Spring Ride across the board, Yukino added quickly. And I am confident that I could lead this publishing house to conquer the moon and open a branch office in a lunar crater 50 years from now, Akira replied dryly before taking a sip of her coffee. Yukino felt a wave of awkwardness wash over her. She looked out the window behind Akira's desk and felt a bit helpless. She had done everything she could to sell the idea. If Haruto insisted on bringing a slow-paced story to a high-stakes competition, there was only so much an editor could do to protect him. Akira went silent as she considered her options. As an editor-in-chief, she valued fairness above all else. If Haruto's work truly lacked quality, she would not force it through just because she liked him. Such a move would only damage her own authority if the series flopped. However, she suddenly remembered a crucial detail. Neither Shiori Takahashi nor Eri have signed exclusive long-term contracts with us, have they? No, Yukino confirmed. Both of them declined the offers by citing their desire to focus on their studies for the time being. Akira's expression tightened. If the magazine rejected the work he was so confident in, what would he do? Would he simply accept the rejection, or would he take his talents to a rival publisher to see if they were willing to take a chance on it? If he left, any hope of their house claiming the prestige of the Ascent of New Gods seed spot would vanish instantly. We shall settle this at the meeting on Monday, Akira decided as she dismissed Yukino. She needed to see the quality of the other competing manuscripts before she could make a final call. When Monday arrived, the air in the conference room was thick with tension. 16 different novels were competing for only 3 available slots in the main magazine. The editors were at each other's throats as they ruthlessly picked apart the flaws in any manuscript that was not their own. However, 2 works seemed to be largely immune to the bickering. These were Red Dragon's Azure Flame Tail and Ares Star Sea. While a few editors tried to find minor faults, no one could deny their inherent quality. Akira had a sharper eye than any of them, and trying to dismiss a clearly superior work would only make them look incompetent in front of their superior. Next up is the new work from Shiori Takahashi, which is titled Anohana, the moderator announced. The room suddenly went quiet as the editors reached for the manuscripts on their desks. Everyone was curious to see what the wunderkind who wrote Blue Spring Ride had come up with next. For a few minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic rustling of paper. This was the first time Akira had actually read the text herself. A shut-in protagonist, a wasted life, and a complete lack of ambition. She paused to reflect on these tropes. However, as the heroine appeared, the story began to find its rhythm. Menma's bright personality and her status as a ghost provided the necessary intrigue. The bittersweet reunion with childhood friends, the cold reception from his former peers, and the heartbreaking scene where Menma stands invisible before her grieving family were all highlights. The writing was evocative enough that Akira found herself slipping into the world of the story. But as she read on, the plot settled back into a quiet and preparatory pace. The pacing feels sluggish, one editor remarked after finishing. I have finished the first chapter and I still do not see the primary conflict or the central goal, another added. The heroine is charming, but the protagonist, Hinton, is a bit of a bore. I do not exactly hate him, but he is not compelling enough to carry a lead role. I actually think the supporting cast is interesting, and the mystery of why she is a ghost is a decent hook, someone countered. The stakes are just too low. Other stories are about saving the world or intense romance, but this is just daily life with a ghost girl. It is not that the writing is bad, but it simply is not exciting enough for a flagship magazine. The room was split. Many editors felt a sense of relief as they looked at Yukino. With Star Sea already looking like a success, they had been terrified that Haruto would deliver another masterpiece and sweep the board. If he failed, it left more room for their own authors to claim a spot. We shall mark this one as pending for now, Akira announced. An hour later, she delivered the final verdict for the day. The first 2 slots go to Ares Star Sea and Red Dragon's Azure Flame Tail. As for the third slot, it remains undecided. I will call a special session tomorrow afternoon to announce my final choice. This was a highly unusual move. Akira was known for being decisive and never dragging out the process. The editors left the room whispering, and they wondered if the remaining candidates were really so close in quality that she needed a whole night to deliberate. Yukino felt a wave of disappointment. As she prepared to leave, Akira's secretary informed her that the chief wanted to see her in her office immediately. I want you to talk to Haruto today, Akira said the moment Yukino sat down. There is an opening at Fleeting Blossoms. I can guarantee him a serialization slot there for Anohana right now. Yukino's heart sank. She had hoped for something more dramatic, such as Akira deciding to take a leap of faith on the flagship magazine. However, there is another option, Akira continued as she noticed the look on the young editor's face. Under normal circumstances, Akira would not make things this complicated. Haruto was talented, but the magazine would not collapse without him. However, given his track record and the potential for the ascent of new gods' seeds, she did not want to risk him jumping ship to a competitor. You told me that Haruto believes this work will surpass Blue Spring Ride. He claims the slow start is intentional and that the popularity will explode later, Akira said gravely. There were 3 other stories in that meeting today that are better suited for the third slot than Anohana. However, their advantages are not insurmountable. While Anohana is not flashy, it also does not have any glaring flaws in the writing. I am willing to trust both of you this once. I will give him the third slot in the main magazine. Yukino's eyes lit up with hope. But since I am making an exception for him, he has to give us something in return, Akira added. That evening, Yukino met with Haruto at her apartment. A condition? What kind of condition? Haruto asked as he leaned forward. The chief said that if you are so confident that this is not a creative failure but a deliberate slow burn that will eclipse your previous work, then you have to prove it, Yukino explained. She wants a guarantee. By the time the final chapter of this series is published, its reader ranking and overall rating must be in the top 4 for the entire magazine. If you can achieve that, it proves you were not just trying to trick her into giving you a slot. If you agree, she will override the committee's objections and sign the contract. Haruto was stunned. Can she really just do that? Of course she can. She runs the department. But every move she makes has a cost. If she forces a series through and it fails to gain traction, it hurts her standing with the higher UPS and the other editors. She is putting her reputation on the line for you. So, what is the catch if I do not hit the target? Haruto asked. Yukino pulled a document from her bag. The contract changes. If Anohana fails to reach the top 4 by its conclusion, you are required to sign an exclusive 3-year partnership agreement with our publishing house as compensation. Akira was playing a clever game. She was interested in Haruto's long-term potential. By using a flagship slot as bait, she was setting up a win-win scenario for the company. If the story became a hit, she would look like a visionary. If it flopped, she would have one of the most promising young writers in the industry locked down for 3 years to recoup the losses with future projects. What do you decide? Yukino asked with a voice tinged with nerves. Haruto thought about it for 30 seconds before looking up. If I were afraid of a little risk, I would not have asked for this in the first place. I could just take the safe route and go to the smaller magazine. Besides, even if I fail, it is not like I have to pay a fine. I just have to stay with the company for 3 years. Most authors would kill for that kind of security anyway. He took a deep breath. As long as I hit the top 4 by the end, the contract remains standard, right? Then I accept the terms. He was not one to hesitate. He signed the paperwork then and there. Yukino felt a sense of vertigo as she watched him. In her time as an editor, she had never managed to get a single author into the flagship magazine. Now, in a single day, 2 of her authors had secured slots simultaneously. It had been a chaotic road to get here, but it was the best possible outcome she could have imagined. Chapter 54, The Final Slot and Rumors Behind the Decision. The following morning, the editor-in-chief of Crimson Maple Literature received word from Yukino regarding Haruto's final decision. So, he actually agreed to it. Akira murmured, staring out at the cityscape through the windows of her office building as she fell into deep thought. In truth, the safest course of action would have been for Haruto to agree to serialize Anohana in Fleeting Blossoms. That path would have allowed the publisher to retain the talented novelist without risking her own professional reputation. However, every major endeavor comes with its share of risks. If Akira lacked the courage to take those risks or the resolve to stand by her choices, she never would have risen to the position of editor-in-chief at Crimson Maple Literature. The meeting held later that afternoon was brief and to the point. The third serialization slot for the upcoming issue of Crimson Maple has been awarded to Anohana by the author Shiori Takahashi, Akira announced. As soon as the words left her mouth, a wave of restless murmuring rippled through the gathered staff of the editorial department. Anohana? The editor-in-chief had spent the entire night deliberating, only to give the final slot to Anohana. Many of the editors who had been confident that their own projects would secure the spot looked visibly crestfallen. At the same time, a cloud of confusion descended upon the room. Why had she chosen Anohana? Among the manuscripts submitted for the meeting, Azure Flame Tail and Star Sea were the clear frontrunners in terms of objective quality. If they were to grade them on a scale of 1 to 100, almost everyone would have given the opening chapters of those 2 works a score of 90 or higher. The other submissions generally hovered between 70 and 90 points. Among the drafts submitted yesterday, there were at least 3 other novels that the staff felt reached an 80-point standard. Yet, Akira had bypassed them all to give the slot to Anohana, a story that most of the team felt only earned a 70 due to its slow pace. Akira held immense prestige within Crimson Maple Literature. None of the editors were foolish enough to stage a dramatic protest or shout their opposition now that a final decision had been reached. However, the atmosphere shifted the moment the meeting adjourned. "Hey, do you think Yukino has some kind of special connection with the editor-in-chief?" one staff member whispered. "I heard that Yukino's father is a big shot who owns a massive corporation, involved in film and gaming. Apparently, he and Akira were close back in university. That's supposedly how she managed to get a senior editor position so quickly. If that's true, then... Where did you hear that? There are always ways to find out these things. It must be nice being a rich heiress. She comes here just to play editor and rig the system." A serialization slot in Crimson Maple might not mean much to someone like her, but for us, it's our entire career and our future. Watch your mouth. Don't go throwing around accusations of inside deals. You never know who's listening. But think about it. Out of 3 slots, 2 went to authors under Yukino. I can accept Star C getting in because it's genuinely good, but Anohana feels like it's lacking. There were clearly better choices. I have no idea what the editor-in-chief is thinking. Forget it. She must have her reasons. We might think Anohana will have mediocre popularity once it starts, but maybe she sees some hidden potential in it that we missed. As ordinary editors, our job is just to propose works. Let's not overstep. If you talk too much, you'll only end up inviting trouble." Throughout the day, a strange, uneasy energy permeated the editorial department. Out of the 3 available slots and over a dozen competing manuscripts, 2 had been awarded to authors managed by Yukino. While it was true that Haruto's previous work, Blue Spring Ride, had been a massive success, he was still a newcomer. A first-time hit could easily be attributed to luck. The fact that Akira was offering him such unwavering support made it impossible for the staff not to suspect that Yukino's personal connections were pulling the strings. In the past, Yukino had proven her worth through her own hard work and professional competence, which had kept her colleagues from gossiping about her family background. But today was different. Inside her office, Yukino pulled the blinds shut. She didn't need to listen to the whispers outside to know exactly what people were saying. "You'd better work hard, Haruto," she sighed, looking down at the 2 manuscripts on her desk, Anohana and Star C. She pushed the negative thoughts out of her mind. This was simply the reality of the professional world. The process didn't matter nearly as much as the results. If Anohana and Reina's Star C both became massive hits after they began serialization, then neither she nor Akira would ever have to justify themselves to anyone. In this industry, success is the only argument that counts. Crimson Maple literature moved with practiced efficiency. By the end of the day, the schedule for the new releases had already been finalized. Anohana was set to debut its first chapter on Sunday, June 25. Star C would also premiere on the same day. Meanwhile, Azure Flame Tale was scheduled for the following week, July 2. Because these were coveted spots in the flagship Crimson Maple magazine, the publisher always selected new series at least a month in advance. A new serialization required a significant lead time for promotion, character poster designs, cover art, and the actual printing process. It was a complex and meticulous undertaking. After all, Crimson Maple was the 3rd highest-selling magazine in the region, with a circulation of over 800,000 copies per issue. Compared to a secondary publication like Fleeting Blossoms, the level of investment and attention the publisher gave to these stories was on an entirely different level. The following day, both Haruto and Reina were notified of the final results. For Haruto, it felt as though a small weight had finally been lifted from his chest. Reina, however, learned the full story from Yukino over the phone, including the controversy surrounding Anohana's approval. To be honest, a part of her had thought that if Anohana failed to get serialized, her personal rivalry with Haruto would have been decided then and there. Yet, as she held her breath and listened to Yukino confirm that his work had passed the board, she couldn't suppress a sudden surge of joy and excitement. Back in the same magazine, competing in the same issue again. The world truly was a small place. Over the following week, Crimson Maple literature began its promotional blitz across the region. Stories in the secondary magazines never received this kind of treatment, but the flagship titles were a different story. The publisher posted an official announcement at the very top of their website's homepage. It detailed the upcoming changes. One series had reached its natural conclusion, another had been cancelled, and a third, which was losing popularity but still held value, was being moved to a different magazine. Information about the 3 new successors to these slots began to spread like wildfire through the light novel community of Minamijo. Chapter 55, Release Day approaches and rivalry intensifies. For the casual readers who only followed the flagship magazines of the major publishers in the region, such as Crimson Maple, or those who stuck to the massive national publications with distribution networks spanning all of Japan, the names Shiori Takahashi and Eri were still quite obscure. It was much like how readers on a specific web novel portal rarely ventured over to see what was trending on a rival site. Among the hundreds of thousands of regular subscribers to Crimson Maple, a significant portion had no idea who these two newcomers were. Shiori Takahashi, Eri, and Red Dragon, are these three really the authors for the new serials in Crimson Maple? I know Red Dragon because I absolutely loved his novel The Shrine Maiden from 2 years ago. But who on earth are Eri and Shiori Takahashi? You seriously haven't heard of them? They're the two genius high school authors who took the local scene by storm this year. Newbies? They just debuted this year and they're already getting serialized in Crimson Maple. That's what makes them geniuses. They aren't like normal people. Both of their debut works performed exceptionally well, so it's only natural they'd have the credentials to compete for a spot in the main magazine serialization meetings. Don't sleep on these two. Especially Shiori Takahashi. In my opinion, her previous work, Blue Spring Ride, only had the numbers it did because the marketing was weak. If you actually compare it to the stuff currently running in Crimson Maple, it's honestly better than half of them. Shiori Takahashi is a literal god. I figured she'd take at least a 6-month break after finishing Blue Spring Ride, but I can't believe she's launching a new series just 2 months later. Last time, Shiori managed to hit #1 in Fleeting Blossoms as a complete unknown. Do you guys think she can pull off the same miracle and top the rankings in Crimson Maple? Don't overhype it. If her new series turns out to be a flop, you're going to look incredibly embarrassed. Look, I get that fans are obsessed with their favorite authors, but I did a little digging into this Shiori Takahashi person. She has been an author for less than half a year. Thinking she can just stroll into Crimson Maple and dominate is laughable. She should worry about her new book getting cancelled for low popularity before she starts dreaming of the top spot. Once the official Crimson Maple literature website announced the news of Haruto and Reina Fujimoto's upcoming serials, the word didn't just spread through the regional literary circles. It also began to circulate within Haruto's school, Minamijo Third High School. While their specific identities were kept secret, high schoolers were naturally nosy about such things. Fleeting Blossoms was one thing, but now both of them were appearing in Crimson Maple. The prestige of Crimson Maple was significantly higher among the student body. For several days, the halls were buzzing with non-stop speculation. As the actual subjects of the rumors, Haruto and Reina both kept their mouths shut in class. This was especially true for Reina. Having a novel in Crimson Maple meant she was no longer a minor player in the light novel industry. If it came out that she was the author Eri, her fame would ensure the news spread across the entire campus before lunch. She wanted nothing more than to continue her path as a writer quietly and without distractions. However, as June began and the results of the late May mock exams were posted, Reina found herself under the spotlight for a different reason. The girl who had consistently held the #1 spot in every single subject for years had finally slipped. In biology, her rank had dropped to 2nd place in the grade. Although her total score still kept her at the very top of the rankings, her failure to secure 1st place in biology was a shocking anomaly. Had the untouchable goddess finally shown a weakness? The student who had managed to beat her in biology was instantly branded a godslayer by the more dramatic members of the student body. For most of Reina's peers, the academic competition was really just a race for 2nd place. They had long ago given up on challenging her for the top spot. One look at her cold, perfect face was usually enough to make the other students lose all hope of catching up. What is going on? Your biology grade actually dropped to 2nd in the year. The moment Reina walked through the door at home, her mother confronted her. The teacher had already posted the report cards in the parents' group chat, and the usually silent group was now alive with chatter about the results. It felt like a public blow to her mother's pride. It's nothing. I just wasn't good enough this time. I'll win it back during the next session, Reina replied softly, looking at her mother's agitated expression. In reality, she had poured all of her mental energy into her new novel during that period. Biology was a subject that relied heavily on memorization, and since she hadn't put in the necessary hours, she had tripped up on a few minor details. You need to focus, Reina. You've never had this problem before. I hope you aren't letting some delinquent at school distract you from your studies, her mother lectured. You're overthinking it. It was just a normal exam and I wasn't feeling my best that day. The people around me are fine. No one is distracting me, Reina said calmly. Back in her room, Reina glanced at her report card. Biology, rank, 2. If this had happened in the past, she wouldn't have been able to sleep all night. But now, she felt nothing. Compared to the frustration of coming in second on a test, the question of how to make her new novel Star C a success was 10 times more important. Time marched on toward the middle of June. As the release date for the new serialization at the end of the month drew closer, Haruto felt his stress levels rising every day. Unlike Blue Spring Ride, the memories he had of the Anohana anime were only enough to cover about 5 chapters of the novel. If the memories didn't trigger again soon, he was going to run out of material very quickly. One afternoon, Haruto arrived at the office to hand over the drafts for chapters 4 and 5 to Yukino. Even though the first chapter hadn't even been published yet, the editorial department needed to be far ahead of schedule to keep up with the printing demands. He ran into Reina there as well. He hadn't seen her in a few weeks, and her pale, beautiful face looked slightly worn. There were faint dark circles under her eyes. What happened? Are you sick? Haruto asked, noticing her state. It's nothing. I just haven't been sleeping much lately. I've been putting too much of myself into the novel, Reina said, her eyes never leaving her manuscript as she performed one final, focused check. I heard about your mock exams in May. Your biology grade dropped to second. Was that because of the book too? Yes, she admitted without hesitation. You really are passionate about writing. To think you'd actually be willing to sacrifice your grades for it, Haruto said, pausing for a moment. That number 1 spot was yours for 2 years. No one in the school could even touch you. Whether it was the total score or individual subjects, you never let anyone else win. A person only has so much strength. I'm just like you, I only have 24 hours in a day. Reina said, looking up at him. Her clear eyes were filled with a fierce, unwavering determination. I want to beat you with my new novel. At the same time, I have to maintain my school ranking and keep up with all my extracurricular classes. I'm not arrogant enough to think I can do it all perfectly. Until I surpass you, I'm willing to let everything else slide. You. Haruto, who generally had a laid-back and easy-going approach to life, felt a genuine stir in his heart witnessing her obsessive, almost demonic level of focus. All right, let's not let things get too tense between you two, Yukino interrupted, casually snacking on a fruit platter. Noticing the heavy atmosphere, she stepped in to play peacemaker. Did you bring the new drafts? Yukino took the manuscripts from both of them, but for once, she didn't check them immediately. What is it? Haruto asked. Oh, did you two forget? I told you before that if you both managed to get serialized in Crimson Maple, I'd have a reward for you. Now that you've both pulled it off, I need to figure out how to make good on that promise. Yukino leaned back on the sofa, her long legs crossed, a playful smile dancing on her lips. A reward? Haruto was curious. Reina also turned to listen. Actually, I haven't quite settled on the details yet. Besides, you two need to focus on your writing and your final exams at the end of June. Let's wait until your summer break starts in July. I'll have it all arranged by then, Yukino said, her eyes sparkling with some secret plan. Haruto and Reina were intrigued, but they didn't press her. It would have felt rude to pester her for details when they were already getting so much support. The three of them spent the rest of the evening handling the routine business of the manuscript handover. The days blurred past, and soon it was the end of June. After over a month of preparation, the moment finally arrived. Crimson Maple, the highest-selling magazine in the publisher's lineup, released its June 25th issue featuring 2 brand new serials. Inside bookstores across the city of Minamijo, the magazine occupied the prime real estate. Massive stacks of Crimson Maple were piled so high they towered over the customers. On the cover of the magazine, 2 girls stood side by side. One was a lovely girl in a white dress with silver hair and a bright smile, Menma. The other was a sharp-eyed girl in a school uniform with crimson hair and matching eyes, her expression cool and aloof. Following the magazine's tradition, the protagonists of the new series were given the center spot on the cover for promotion. These were, of course, the heroines of Anohana and Star C. Today, their stories would finally meet the fans. Chapter 56, First Readers and the Debut of a New Story. On Sunday morning, Sora arrived at the bookstore before the shutters were even up, determined to be among the first to get his hands on the latest issue of Crimson Maple. He wasn't alone, a small crowd of readers with the same idea had already gathered near the entrance. As the highest-selling light novel magazine in the Minamijo region, Crimson Maple enjoyed massive popularity. Thanks to the booming ACK industry in Japan, following a true weekly or monthly serial was as common as scrolling through social media. For many, not having a volume or a magazine tucked under their arm felt like leaving the house without a phone. Of course, Sora had an extra incentive to wake up early today. He knew that Shiori Takahashi, the author he'd been following since her debut in the secondary magazine Fleeting Blossoms, were officially debuting her new works in this very issue of the flagship magazine. Normally, Sora didn't bother with smaller publications. With limited free time, most readers couldn't possibly keep up with every magazine on the market. It was a lot like the major web novel platforms, thousands of stories updated daily, but the average reader only had eyes for the top tier like Crimson Maple. However, because the light novel community was so vast, talented works in B-tier magazines like Fleeting Blossoms often gained traction through word of mouth. If a series was truly exceptional, its tankban sales would skyrocket, forcing the author's name into the spotlight. That was exactly how Sora had discovered Blue Spring Ride. It was dominating the regional sales charts for a month straight and decided to give it a shot. Since then, he had fallen down the rabbit hole, developing an intense admiration for the author's ability to write delicate, emotional stories. An author who writes such moving, healing youth stories must be a kind, gentle person in real life, Sora mused, a flush of excitement warming his face. I wonder what kind of story she's prepared for us this time. When the doors finally opened, he rushed to the shelves. His eyes immediately locked onto the cover of Crimson Maple. Standing center stage were two beautiful anime-style girls, one with silver hair and a white dress, Menma, and the other with crimson hair and piercing eyes, the heroine of Shiori's new work and Star C. That will be 700 yen. Thank you for your purchase, the cashier said with a polite bow. Seriously, a top-tier magazine like Crimson Maple is worth every bit of 700 yen, while those secondary rags charge nearly 900 for half the quality. No wonder this one towers over the rest, Sora muttered to himself, glancing at the massive stacks of the magazine piled high in the prime real estate of the store. Once home, he set the stage, a bag of chips, a pair of chopsticks to keep his fingers clean, and a cold bottle of ramen. He was ready for his journey into Shiori's new story. Anohana, the flower we saw that day. The story opened in the quiet of midsummer. A peaceful house, a gentle breeze wafting through the veranda, and then... Hey, is that a jinx? A silver-haired girl in a white dress suddenly spoke up, hovering next to a teenage boy who was deeply focused on a handheld game. No, it's not. Women really are clueless about these things. The boy, Hinton Yadomi, responded instinctively to the voice in his ear. But as he turned and saw the silver-haired girl, Menma, a figure that should have been impossible to see ever again, he froze. His mind raced. He concluded that he must be having a breakdown, he was seeing someone who shouldn't exist. Suppressing his internal panic, he got up to cook some instant ramen. But the girl lunged forward, clinging to his shoulder and shouting in a cute, persistent voice. No fair. I want ramen too. Put an egg in it. I want the egg clouds. The story followed Hinta, a shut-in who spent his days gaming and skipping school, and Menma, the girl who had suddenly crashed back into his life on a random summer afternoon. He ignored her plea for a bowl of noodles. He ignored her specific request for a soft-boiled egg, instead cranking up the heat until the egg was hard and rubbery. He remained indifferent to her pouting, but she quickly forgave him with an effortless smile. Through these simple daily interactions, the author masterfully established the intimacy between them and the absolute trust the girl placed in the boy. At first, Sora didn't notice anything strange, until the people around the protagonist began talking to him, completely oblivious to the girl standing right next to him. The realization hit Sora like a physical weight. This girl, she's a ghost. The protagonist, a firm materialist, tried to convince himself that she was a hallucination. Menma had died years ago. He told himself his recent stress was just making him see things. Why show up now after all these years? And looking like a teenager, no less. Hinta asked. I don't really know either. Menma replied with a burst of energy, pumping her fist with unearned confidence. But I think I need you to grant a wish for me. A wish? What kind of wish? I don't know what my wish is either. The opening of the first chapter was intriguing enough, but as the pages turned, the plot settled into a quiet, slice-of-life rhythm. Menma, unable to bear seeing their childhood friend group fall apart after her death, kept nagging Hinta to find their old companions, Anaru, Yukiatsu, Tsurako, and Poppo. One by one, the childhood friends appeared. They met Hinta's claims with cold scoffs and mockery. To them, he was just a pathetic dropout who couldn't move on from a tragedy that happened years ago, someone who wasted his life rotting at home while shouting the name of a dead girl. The narrative began to intersperse these encounters with flashes of childhood memories. The truth of Menma's death came to light. The group had been teasing her about liking Hinta. To hide his embarrassment, Hinta had blurted out a cruel lie. Who could ever like a weirdo like her? Sora's grip on the magazine tightened. This protagonist. Even after hearing those words, Menma had given him a gentle, forgiving smile. But Hinta, overcome with shame, had run away. Menma had chased after him, only to lose her footing and drown in the river. The entire first chapter served as a foundation, a tapestry of memories and introductions. It brought all the key players onto the stage while subtly revealing a heartbreaking truth through a single detail. If Menma were truly just a hallucination, she wouldn't be able to leave Hinta's sight. She wouldn't be able to wander back to her old home, talk to her parents and her younger brother, and say, in a voice heavy with loneliness while they remained unaware of her presence, "Even I know, that I'm already dead." Menma wasn't a hallucination. She was a real, lingering soul that only Hinta could see. At that moment, Sora felt something soft inside him ache. Chapter 1, End. Sora took a long, shaky breath. How did he feel? It was hard to put into words. Was it exciting? Not exactly. There were no high-stakes battles or explosive plot twists. It was the story of a boy haunted by the ghost of his childhood friend. At her urging, he reached out to the friends he hadn't spoken to in years, only to be met with ridicule and looks of pity, as if he were losing his mind. For a reader finishing only the first chapter, the experience was undeniably heavy and oppressive. But just as there are readers for every niche, from dark tragedies to power fantasies, there is a place for stories like this. Sora realized the story had hooked him. It didn't matter if Hinta was frustrating or if the other friends seemed cold. What mattered was that he already loved Menma. Chapter 57, Early Reactions and Public Reputation. Sora found himself falling for the girl depicted in that first chapter, a girl who remained optimistic, proactive, and radiant despite her circumstances. He loved how she could stand in her old family home with a bright smile on her face, even as she witnessed the painful reality of her absence. He saw her mother, who still set a place for her at the table every single day as if she had never left. He saw her younger brother, who grumbled coldly that seeing mom serve a dead sister's dinner was annoying. He saw her father, who watched it all in stony silence without saying a word. When Menma uttered that heartbreaking line, "Even I know that I'm already dead," she said it while looking at the family who couldn't see her, wearing a gentle, tender smile. Even when the boy she loved called her a weirdo to her face, her first instinct was to worry about his feelings and offer him a smile. What exactly was her goal? What was this wish she spoke of? Sora was burning with curiosity. He wanted to keep reading. He wanted to see her story through to the end. As expected of Shiori Takahashi, Sora sighed. Her character writing was fundamentally different from almost every other author in the industry. He wasn't sure if the pacing would pick up later, but after one chapter, he realized something important. If the protagonist, Hinton, stayed this frustrating for the rest of the book, the only way to enjoy the story was to avoid empathizing with him entirely. Trying to see the world through Hinton's eyes would be far too depressing. Instead, Sora decided to view the story from a detached perspective, focusing solely on Menma, the lost girl who had become the emotional center of the work. However, he was self-aware enough to know that not every reader would share the patience of a veteran fan like himself. He opened the official Crimson Maple Literature website to see how the rest of the community was reacting. The Crimson Maple series forum was as lively as ever. "Man, has everyone read Star Sea yet? It's absolutely incredible. Is that really from a newcomer? It's only the first chapter, guys. Let's not overhype it. Plenty of stories start strong and then crash and burn. I don't care, I think it's great. The world building in chapter 1 is solid, and the heroine is so cool. She's definitely not a soft-hearted pushover." When her best friend got trapped, she realized there was no way to save her and immediately sacrificed her to secure the best outcome for the rest of the team. That was cold-blooded and awesome. Agreed. It feels like a high-quality read. The author's name is Eri, right? That sounds familiar. Oh, wait. Wasn't there a book called Yesterday's Starlight released a while back? Yeah, that was her debut work. Really? She's improved that much? I read the tankban for Yesterday's Starlight, and while it was good, it definitely felt like it had some rough edges. This new one is on a whole different level. Hey, is anyone actually going to talk about Shiori Takahashi's Anohana? I read Anohana too. I thought it was pretty interesting. The premise is a hook, and Menma is adorable. And? That's it. Well, what else is there to say? It's a bit slow. The author spent about 60% of the first chapter just explaining the character relationships and the setting. It made the plot feel a little dry. I think both new series are fine, but Star C definitely had a more exciting first chapter than Anohana. I heard they're both high schoolers from the same school in Minamijo. In the past, Shiori Takahashi's Blue Spring Ride always stayed ahead of Aries. Maybe this is her time for some revenge. The general consensus seemed to be that while Anohana was slow, it still had plenty of charm and solid character writing. While the first chapter hadn't received rave reviews, there was almost no negative feedback either. It was the kind of reading experience that was perfectly fine to continue, but you wouldn't necessarily feel a crushing void if you stopped. Sora scrolled through a few more pages of the forum and shook his head. He took out his phone, scanned the QR code on the back of the magazine, and entered the official voting page. He didn't cast his vote for the novel itself, but for Menma, the girl who had managed to touch his heart. He was a patient reader who enjoyed slow burn stories. Based purely on the character of Menma, he was officially a fan. But as he feared, not everyone was as patient. Most Crimson Maple readers didn't care for long-term setups, they wanted an immediate mental impact the moment they opened the page. Monday morning arrived at the Crimson Maple Literature editorial department. The staff gathered around to review the data for the latest issue. They used the same standardized reader survey metrics used by all major publishing houses. Winter Lake. Votes, 25,169, rank 1. Rating, 9.0, rank 1. She's a bit strange. Votes, 16,339, rank 2. Rating, 9.0, rank 2. Summer Days. Votes, 10,963, rank 3. Rating, 8.9, rank 3. Star C. Votes, 6,108, rank 9. Rating, 8.6, rank 7. Anohana. Votes, 2,316, rank 13. Rating, 8.2, rank 12. Black Pupil. Votes, 621, rank 14. Rating, 5.9, rank 14. Because Black Pupil has ranked last in reader votes for 5 consecutive weeks and has seen dismal market feedback and ratings, the author has been ordered to wrap up the story with an open ending this issue. Its slot will be taken by Azure Flame Tail in the next issue. Any novel capable of getting serialized in Crimson Maple was guaranteed a certain level of quality, otherwise it would never have passed the board meetings. Initial reader ratings usually sat above 8.0. However, if a story began to fall apart later on, the score could drop lower than anyone imagined. While Winter Lake and She's a Bit Strange both showed a 9.0 rating, the internal system actually tracked them to 3 decimal places. One was effectively a 9.078 while the other was a 9.011, which explained why they shared a score but held different ranks. The 13th place debut for Anohana was exactly what the editorial staff had expected. A new series has no established fan base, so it was impossible to compete with long-running hits that had months or years to build a following. Aside from the dying Black Pupil at the bottom, the editors had predicted Anohana and Star C would take the tail end of the rankings. They had pegged Anohana for 13th with maybe 1,000 or 2 votes. However, Star C had shattered their expectations. Ranking 9th overall with over 6,000 votes and a reader rating that put it at 7th place was an incredible achievement for a first chapter. Star C is the real deal. If it's doing this well after just one chapter, the popularity is going to explode once it gets some momentum, one editor remarked. As long as it keeps this up and builds a fan base, it's a serious contender for the top 5, another added. It's almost scary. How is this Aries so strong? Are all the rookies in the region this year monsters? On the flip side, Anohana didn't really surprise anyone. That's just the nature of slow burn works. Readers gave it a couple thousand votes out of curiosity and a bit of fresh interest. If the upcoming chapters don't pick up the pace, the rating and the vote count will slowly bleed out. We could be looking at a 7.0 rating and barely 1,000 votes by chapter 8. It's not that slow burn stories don't exist, but they usually follow a different release model. Famous authors will drop several volumes at once so fans can binge the whole thing. Readers can handle a slow start if they have the rest of the book in their hands. But for a weekly serial, being slow is almost fatal. The publisher's decision to keep or cut a series is based on the last few weeks of data. If you're at the bottom for 5 or 6 weeks straight, the company isn't a charity. They're paying out hundreds of thousands in royalties every month. If a story isn't creating value, they'll axe it in a heartbeat. We'll just have to see how Shiori Takahashi handles the pressure. Even a genius has to follow the rules of the market. Anohana isn't a bad book. You can see the craft and the structural skill in every line, but serializing a slow burn story like this shows a total lack of respect for how the market actually works. After discussing the performance of the 14 titles, the editors returned to their desks. Yukino stared at the report for several minutes, her eyes lingering on Anohana's 13th place finish. She wasn't discouraged, though. It was only the first chapter. According to the unwritten rules of the house, a story would usually get at least 7 chapters before being forced into an open-ending wrap-up. In the industry, they called it the axe. She wouldn't start getting truly nervous until the series had been running for a month without any sign of improvement. Yukino filed away the reports and waited until lunch to call the 2 authors. She started with Haruto. Your ratings and votes came in at 12th and 13th place respectively, she reported. I see. Thanks for letting me know, Haruto replied. He had expected these numbers, so his voice remained calm and even. I appreciate the update, Yukino. After hanging up, she called Reina and gave her the results for Star C. And how did Haruto's work do? Reina asked. On the rooftop of the school building, a light breeze tugged at the hem of Reina's skirt. She held a copy of Crimson Maple in her hand, the one she had bought yesterday. The pages containing Haruto's Anohana asterisk were covered in pencil marks and circled notes. She had already read the first chapter several times in a single day. Despite the difference in their rankings, she felt a profound sense of unease. She could see it clearly, in her own first chapter of Star C, she hadn't managed to create a single character that could even come close to the emotional weight of Haruto's heroine, Menma. Chapter 58, Second Chapter Progress and Rising Concerns. After hanging up the phone, Reina leaned over the concrete railing of the rooftop and looked down toward a specific classroom in the neighboring building. Her vision was quite sharp, allowing her to spot Haruto sitting in his usual window seat in class 2 to 3. He was fast asleep, head buried in his arms. She had only discovered this vantage point because her competitive nature had driven her to keep a close eye on him lately. He really has no sense of urgency whatsoever. Anohana debuted in 13th place. She muttered to herself. There were only 14 series currently running in Crimson Maple. The one at the very bottom, Black Pupil, was a dead work walking, already confirmed for cancellation because the plot had completely unraveled. Based on what Reina had gathered from Yukino regarding the other submissions, the evaluations for Azure Flame Tail were roughly on par with her own Star C. It was safe to assume that the debut of that series would yield similar numbers. Logic dictated that once Black Pupil concluded in the next issue and the veteran author Red Dragon launched Azure Flame Tail, Anohana would likely slide down to 14th place. It would be the absolute bottom of the rankings. Reina pressed her pale palms against her face, hiding her anxious expression. She watched Haruto through the gaps between her fingers as he continued his peaceful nap by the window. She truly couldn't understand him. Even if his novel was a slow burn and he had absolute confidence in the later chapters, who could ever predict the future? If he had time to sleep, he should be using it to brainstorm, double-check his drafts, and see if there was anything at all he could do to improve the pacing. Instead, he just lay there. How can you even sleep right now? She stomped her foot in frustration, but almost immediately, she realized her reaction was a bit strange. Why was she getting anxious on his behalf? After a moment of self-reflection, she realized that while she desperately wanted to beat Haruto herself, she couldn't stand the thought of him losing to anyone else. In the world of dreams, Haruto was once again immersed in the memories of Shiori Takahashi. It was just as he had suspected. If he spent his waking hours obsessing over a specific element of her life, the likelihood of seeing a related memory fragment during sleep increased significantly. Naturally, he had been thinking about nothing but the serialization of Anohana. When he lay down for a quick nap after lunch, he found himself dreaming of the middle stretch of the original Anohana anime, specifically episodes 4 through 6. He spent the entire lunch break captivated by the unfolding story. It definitely gets more interesting as it goes along. The setup is quite long, but once the complicated character dynamics are ironed out, you start to see the real heart of the series. The childhood friends had drifted apart because of the heroine's death, and the core of the story was about her spirit driving the protagonist to mend those broken bonds and rediscover their lost friendship. However, even after seeing up to the 6th episode, Haruto felt the story was merely excellent. He didn't yet feel it was a masterpiece that surpassed Blue Spring Ride. But in Shiori's memories, the comments on the streaming site she used were filled with viewers crying and hyping up how emotional the later half was. This only fueled Haruto's curiosity. The later half? How much later? Once Shiori finished those 3 episodes, her memory shifted to something else entirely. Instead of watching more anime, she started playing a video game. It was a pixel art game with graphics so retro they looked ancient, but she had started it based on a friend's recommendation that the story was incredible. An island, a wish, 2 doctors. Haruto found every aspect of this parallel world fascinating, so he paid close attention to this new memory fragment as well. In the afternoon, the sharp ringing of the school bell jolted him awake. Today was Monday, marking the start of his final week at school for the semester. From Monday to Wednesday, there would be no regular classes, only final exams. The plot of that pixel game had only just begun. To be honest, the beginning seemed quite dull, but Haruto treated it as a welcome distraction. For now, he needed to focus on the tests in front of him. Over the next few days, as the exams came to an end, the 2nd chapter of Anohana was officially released. The 2nd chapter was, yet more setup. It introduced Poppo, the boisterous boy who had grown into a world-traveling free spirit, and Tsurako, the elegant and aloof honors student attending a prestigious prep school. Then there was Yukietsu, the handsome and arrogant top student at that same elite school. Finally, there was Anaru, a fashionable girl at a lower-ranked school who clearly harbored feelings for the protagonist, Hinton. While Poppo remained as cheerful and welcoming as he had been as a child, Tsurako and Yukietsu were openly mocking and distant. They looked down on their former friends who had dropped out or failed to get into good schools, viewing Hinton's behavior as a pathetic sign of his inability to cope with reality. The chapter focused on the interactions between these characters, highlighting the deep-seated friction between them. Every conflict, however, centered on the memory of Menma. By the end of the chapter, there were signs that Hinton, Poppo, and the tsundere Anaru were beginning to rekindle their old bond. On the Crimson Maple Literature website, some of Shiori Takahashi's fans were starting to complain. The pacing is just so slow. What kind of story is Shiori Takahashi trying to tell here? Is it a romance? It doesn't really feel like one. There's not much romance to write about anyway. The relationships are already obvious. From the first 2 chapters, it's clear that as kids, Yukietsu and Hinton both liked Menma. Tsurako likes Yukietsu, and Anaru likes Hinton. Poppo is just the happy-go-lucky guy who doesn't like anyone like that. So what's the point? Is it just going to be a casual daily life story between a ghost girl and a shut-in? I'm starting to worry that Shiori has lost her touch. She's famous for writing shoujo-style youth romances. Why is she trying to write this weird, ambiguous story? I've read the first 2 chapters. Honestly, the writing isn't bad, but the quality feels like a step down from Blue Spring Ride. I actually like how Menma is written. I've teared up a few times during her scenes, but the rest of the characters just feel a bit boring. Everyone needs to relax. Trust in Shiori's talent. It's only the 2nd chapter, what's everyone panicking for? It's just frustrating to see Eri, who used to lose to Shiori Takahashi, getting rave reviews for her new series while this one struggles. The Eri fans are being so arrogant on the forums. They're constantly trashing Shiori, calling her a one-hit wonder and saying her lack of skill is being exposed now that she's in a real magazine. They're saying the tide has gone out and we're seeing that she was just swimming naked. It's really annoying to read. Chapter 59, Rankings Fall and a Summer Convention Plan. The performance data for the 2nd chapter of Anohana arrived, and it confirmed exactly what most people had anticipated. The total reader vote count stood at 3,016, placing it 14th, the very bottom of the rankings. In terms of rating, it earned an 8.2, which sat at 13th place. Meanwhile, the newcomer Azure Flame Tail made a strong entrance with 5,152 votes and an 8.4 rating, taking 10th and 9th place respectively. As for Reina's Star C, its popularity ranking climbed by 1 spot while its rating remained steady. On paper, Anohana was officially the least popular series in the current issue of Crimson Maple. However, despite the low numbers, there wasn't much negative noise within the industry or among the fandom. While the pacing was undeniably slow and the central mystery of Menma's wish remained unsolved, the quality of the writing was impossible to fault. It was like a student who consistently scored B+, the teacher might not shower them with praise, but they had no reason to scold them either. Furthermore, while the ranking looked grim, the actual numbers for Anohana were technically on an upward trajectory. Friday was deadline day. By now, summer break had officially begun for Haruto and Reina. With their academic burdens lifted, both were able to devote themselves entirely to their manuscripts, and they looked much more refreshed than they had during the exam season. An entire semester has just flown by. I still remember meeting you both for the first time back in the winter, when you were still on winter break. Time really is a blur. I'm so jealous of high school students, Yukino sighed. She was wearing a white summer dress that left her slender arms bare, and her eyes sparkled with genuine envy at the mention of their vacation. I'd actually prefer to grow up as fast as possible, Reina replied casually. I want to get through high school so I can go away to university. Then I wouldn't have to act like a fugitive every day, worrying about my family finding out what I'm doing. As she spoke, her gaze drifted toward Haruto, who was currently preoccupied with examining Yukino's extensive collection of anime figurines and merchandise. Speaking of which, Haruto, you're remarkably composed, Yukino remarked, noting his relaxed posture. Your popularity is currently at the bottom of the Crimson Maple rankings. How are you not panicking? Why should I be in a rush? Popularity isn't something I can control, that's up to the readers. Besides, I have a feeling the numbers will start to climb in a week or two, Haruto said. He knew people called it a slow burn, but that really only applied to the first 4 chapters. Once the foundation was laid and the character dynamics were clear, the story would naturally find its stride. Yukino let out a long, weary sigh. Between the two of them, Reina took writing almost too seriously, agonizing over every single word choice, while Haruto was far too nonchalant. Once the words were on the page, he seemed to carry no stress at all. Yukino turned her attention to the drafts they had brought in today. After finishing them, a look of deep reflection crossed her face. Reina's growth as an author was still on a steep upward curve, with the quality of Star C improving with every chapter. On the other hand, the chapters Haruto submitted today, episodes 5 and 6, were where the story truly started to get good. How long are you planning to make these series? Yukino asked. For Star C, I'm thinking of at least 20 chapters, Reina said after a moment of consideration. But if I get a good idea during the process, the length might increase. For me, Anohana will probably be similar to the Blue Spring Ride. About 13 or 14 chapters, Haruto replied. That's quite short, Yukino noted, shaking her head. But maybe that's for the best. Stick to your original vision. While the content might be brief, it allows the story to reach its peak without being dragged out. I hate it when authors find success and then bloat their work with filler just to keep the checks coming, ruining a potential masterpiece. In fact, I hate 2 types of authors above all else, those who write bad endings, and those who refuse to let a story end because they're making money, completely disregarding the narrative structure. Is that why you became an editor? Haruto asked. So you could exercise your authority to stop bad authors from existing. Not exactly, Yukino replied, her lips curving into a smile as she looked at him. Actually, I don't think I ever told you this. My family isn't originally from around here, we're from Tokyo. My father owns a multimedia production company there. Ever since I graduated, he's been hounding me to come back and serve as his assistant so I can eventually take over the business. A classic rich heiress, Haruto thought. He glanced around the room at her expensive collectibles. With an editor's salary, there was no way she could afford all of this without a massive safety net. A family business in Tokyo sounds great. Why didn't you listen to him? Rich heiress? Please. There are too many wealthy people in Tokyo. At best, my family is just upper middle class. I'm fine with living a comfortable life, but the whole corporate ladder thing isn't for me, Yukino laughed. Having known them for over half a year, she viewed them as genuine friends and felt comfortable discussing her personal life. I love anime, novels, and films, but that doesn't mean I want to be involved in the stress of producing them. I studied literature, so being an editor lets me read new stories first. It's the perfect marriage of hobby and profession. Besides, being an editor here is mostly a way to hide from my father. Her expression softened as she continued. But my attitude has changed a bit. This was my first job out of university, and it will likely be my last. I want to spend my career discovering at least a few stories that fans will genuinely love. I want to unearth writers with real potential. That way, if I ever have to go back to Tokyo and people try to dismiss me as someone who only got where they are because of their family, I can shut them up. I'll tell them, I had the eye to discover authors like Shiori Takahashi and Eri from the masses. Can you say the same? Yukino laughed openly as she made the joke. Haruto and Reina exchanged a glance. They hadn't realized she felt so strongly about her role. They had simply assumed she was a bored wealthy girl experiencing the commoner life. Anyway, do you both remember the reward I promised you for passing the serialization meeting? Yukino's eyes twinkled with a mischievous light. Originally, I was going to give you some rare items from my collection in Tokyo as a gift. Since I don't have many friends in this region, spending time with you two is when I'm at my most relaxed. And now? Haruto asked. He knew the word originally always preceded a but. I've changed my mind, Yukino said. You're both students. You spend your days in class and your nights writing, and you spend your few free moments discussing plots with me. I was thinking about it, and that's a pretty tragic way to spend your youth. How can two people who write stories celebrating the youthful adventures of high school protagonists live such boring lives themselves? Yukino stood up, her hair swaying gently. So, are you both free this Sunday? Sunday? I'm free, Haruto said. It's summer break, so I have plenty of time to write. I live alone anyway, so no one's going to stop me. I can tell my family I'm going to a piano recital at the concert hall, Reina added. Both were curious about the reward, which made them quick to agree. Great. In that case, this Sunday, we're going to get dressed up. We're going to the big summer anime convention in the city. Yukino announced excitedly. Makeup, props, costumes, food. I'm covering everything. Consider it my treat for a full day of fun. What do you think? Wait, what? Reina blinked. Is this the reward? Seriously? Haruto looked completely bewildered. What's with those faces? It'll be great. Yukino beamed. Haruto hesitated. Isn't this just us accompanying you to a convention because you're lonely? And from the sounds of it, you don't just want to go, you want us to cosplay? That's incredibly embarrassing. The memories of Shiori dressed in a maid outfit for a convention flashed through Haruto's mind. The second-hand embarrassment from those forgotten memories made him wince. Yukino gave him a sharp look. What, you're not willing? I'll do it. A calm, feminine voice cut him off. Haruto looked at Reina in total disbelief, only to see a flicker of genuine interest in her usually cool, detached eyes. What is wrong with you? Stop revealing weird personality traits that don't match your image. Haruto screamed internally. And you, Haruto? Yukino asked, her gaze fixed on him. Don't be a spoilsport. Are you telling me a self-proclaimed otaku is afraid of a convention? Haruto looked at the two of them. He knew she was baiting him, but he fell for it anyway. Fine, whatever. I'll go. It wasn't that he hated conventions. He'd been a fan for years, but he'd never gone with girls before. Besides, since his father passed away, he hadn't really gone out with friends. A change of pace might be exactly what he needed. Perfect. Meet at my place this Sunday at 4 a.m. sharp, Yukino commanded with a satisfied grin. Half an hour later, Haruto and Reina stepped out of Yukino's apartment. They stood by the curb waiting for their respective taxis. Before his car arrived, Haruto waved to her. See you Sunday, I guess. See you. Sunday, Reina replied, her voice trailing off slightly. Chapter 60, Cosplay Morning and the Convention Begins. Sunday. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Haruto was jolted awake by his phone. He had been asleep for barely 5 hours. He fumbled for the device and pressed it to his ear, his mind a thick fog. Time to get up. Yukino's voice came through the receiver, clear and melodic like a silver bell. Honestly, Haruto had never experienced the luxury, or the annoyance of someone calling to wake him up before. His brain felt like it was spinning in circles. Who is this? Did I fall into another one of Shiori Takahashi's memories? He muttered to himself, still half drifting in sleep. Shiori Takahashi? Who's that? Are you talking about your pen name, Shiori Takahashi? Yukino's sharp response snapped him into instant lucidity. He performed a frantic roll across the mattress and sat bolt upright. It's only 4 in the morning. He croaked, glancing at the clock. And your point is? How late were you planning to sleep? Wash up and get over to my place immediately or we're going to be late. After hanging up, Haruto stared out the window. The city of Minamijo was never truly silent, even at this hour, he could see groups of night owls wandering the streets. He sighed, shook his head to clear the cobwebs, and climbed out of bed. An hour later, a taxi dropped him off at Yukino's apartment complex. Her front door was left slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Reina, you look incredible. You're a natural cosplayer. This outfit is absolutely stunning on you. The first thing Haruto saw was Reina Fujimoto dressed in a silk, silver-toned mage's robe. The garment was cinched tightly at her waist, accentuating her slender curves. Her legs were encased in white thigh-high stockings that vanished into a pair of matching silver boots. Her dark hair had been styled into delicate, intricate braids, and she held a staff that shimmered with the blue of flowing water. Small prosthetic appliances had been used to give her ears the elegant, pointed silhouette of an elf. With the addition of light, professional makeup, her already striking features were elevated to an ethereal level. She looked exactly like a high elf princess stepped straight out of a medieval fantasy epic. Yukino's transformation was even more jaw-dropping. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders, and she wore a suit of vibrant red leather armor. The fit was intentionally snug, creating a noticeable push-up effect at the bust. She wore a matching scarlet leather miniskirt that barely reached her hips, paired with black translucent stockings that made her legs seem to go on forever. Her eyes were accented with alluring, bold makeup that gave her a dangerous, mature edge. Haruto recognized the characters immediately. They were from the smash hit isekai anime My Life in Another World. The demon king and the hero both fell for me at first sight. Reina Fujimoto was the elven hero, and Yukino was the seductress demon king. While the show's title was pure power fantasy bait, the execution was undeniably addictive, and its popularity was currently through the roof. To be perfectly honest, their costumes weren't 100% faithful to the source material's designs. However, Haruto was certain that the moment these two stepped onto the convention floor, they would become the center of the universe. When cosplayers are this attractive, no one cares about accuracy or canon temperament. You're late. We've been waiting for you, Yukino said, a flicker of feigned annoyance crossing her face. How are you both ready already? Between the outfits and the makeup, this must have taken hours, Haruto stammered, still dazed. That's because Reina stayed over last night. We finished the heavy lifting hours ago, Yukino replied with a shrug. Haruto didn't press for details, he didn't need a play-by-play of their sleepover. All right, it's almost 5. Hurry up, Haruto. Yukino grabbed him by the shoulder and shoved him toward a spare room. Haruto caught a glimpse of Yukino's personal stash, 3 rows of high-end cosplay racks, beds covered in discarded skirts, stockings, and a mountain of makeup kits. This woman was a hardcore otaku. Beyond the anime merchandise, her walls were adorned with traditional Japanese garments, medieval Western plate armor, and even functional-looking bows, crossbows, shields, and katanas. Yukino pushed him down in front of her vanity mirror. Sit still and don't look around. I need to focus, she warned. If Haruto were a man in his late 20s, Yukino might have been more guarded. But to her, a 16-year-old high school boy was essentially a younger brother, so she didn't bother with much modesty. Makeup? Really? Haruto had never had anything more than sunscreen on his face. Of course. Cosplay is 50% natural looks and 50% professional makeup. The protagonist of My Life in Another World is calm, handsome, and highly intelligent. You have the right vibe, but you look a bit too young. I'm going to use some eyeshadow and contouring to sharpen your nose and jawline. Then we'll put on the blonde wig and those silver-rimmed glasses. With your bone structure, the result should be top tier. Yukino talked as she worked, her hands moving with practiced speed. She applied various liquids and creams to his face that Haruto couldn't even name. Since he had agreed to do this, he didn't resist, though he found the process a bit tedious. He decided to strike up a conversation to pass the time. Does Reina not mind doing this? Haruto's makeup was relatively simple, but the intricate braiding in Reina's hair must have taken at least 2 hours. He hadn't expected someone as protective of her time as Reina to waste so much of it on dress-up. Does anyone who aims to be a light novel author actually hate conventions? Yukino asked, using a highlighting pen on the bridge of his nose. She spent years playing the role of the perfect, obedient daughter at home. That doesn't mean she actually dislikes this world. Yukino's lips curled into a smirk. In fact, while I was doing her makeup, I could tell she was genuinely enjoying herself. Just like you. Yukino looked at him through the reflection of the mirror. You might be acting all stoic, but you're actually having fun, aren't you? Haruto thought about it for a second. I suppose so. There's a certain sense of excitement building up. Though, that might just be because I haven't had a social outing with friends in over 6 months. Yukino's hand, holding a blending brush, brushed against his cheek, carrying a faint, pleasant scent. She laughed softly. Don't worry. Cosplay is a slippery slope, once you do it once, you're hooked. I only invited you two because I truly consider you friends. When you eventually become famous cosplayers, don't forget who showed you the ropes. Once the makeup was done, Haruto changed into the costume Yukino had prepared, an elaborate Isekai Knight's uniform, complete with a prop sword. When he stepped back into the living room, Yukino's eyes lit up. With the silver-rimmed glasses, the golden wig, and the polished white armor, he looked like a completely different person. Wow! You actually look exactly like the protagonist from the anime. While Yukino and Reina relied on their sheer beauty to carry their roles, Haruto's transformation actually captured the specific cool genius aura of the character perfectly. Come here, both of you. Let's get a group photo first. Yukino had been to many conventions, but this was the first time she had a full party. She stood to Haruto's left and gestured to Reina. Come on. What are you standing there for? I have to be in the photo too. Reina hesitated. Day. Yukino rolled her eyes. We're cosplaying the 2 female leads and the male lead. How could we not take a group photo? Reina took a deep breath, shed her hesitation, and stepped to Haruto's right side. Yukino set her phone on the TV stand, adjusted the timer, and ran back into frame. The screen captured the 3 of them together for the first time, the blonde, bespectacled Haruto, the silver-clad elven Reina, and the red-armored, sultry Yukino. Click! The photo was crystal clear. Yukino looked ecstatic, Reina looked a bit shy, and Haruto looked intensely serious, though internally, he was a bit flustered being sandwiched between 2 beautiful girls. In the early morning light of Minamijo, a sleek red sports car sped toward the city center. Haruto wasn't much of a car guy, but even he could tell Yukino's ride was worth a fortune. After a quick breakfast near the venue, they parked the car and followed the growing crowd toward the Minamijo Convention Center. Look at those 3. Holy crap, look at the quality of those cosplayers. Are those girls even real? They're so cute. Wait, they're cosplaying Eri and Yuffie from the Demon King anime, right? Definitely. And the guy with them is spot on as Gaius. Those glasses give him that perfect cool prick vibe from the show. In the anime, Gaius is such a show-off that the hero and the Demon King both fall for him. I can see why. As they walked toward the entrance, heads turned everywhere. Money can buy high-quality costumes and professional makeup, but it can't buy natural beauty and presence. Haruto was tall and striking, and when flanked by Reina and Yukino, both of whom possessed top-tier looks and long, elegant legs, the trio became an unstoppable force. Everywhere they went, a small circle of admirers formed. Yukino, why is everyone staring at us? Reina whispered, her face flushing a light pink. The weight of so many eyes made her feel a bit overwhelmed. In her mind, a convention was just people wearing anime clothes in a public space, she hadn't anticipated this level of intense scrutiny. It just means they recognize the quality and they like what they see, Yukino replied easily. She was used to this, usually, she had to deal with this kind of attention all by herself. As they wandered through the hall, Yukino bumped into several acquaintances who waved her down. Hey! Good to see you here. You look stunning as always, Yukino. Honestly, stop coming to these shows. You make those of us hired as professional cosplayers look like amateurs. Who are the two little ones you brought with you? They're great. Haruto remained silent, staying in character as the cool and aloof knight. He found that leaning into the role actually made the experience quite fun. Occasionally, fans would approach him for a photo, and he would oblige with a stoic nod. As for Reina, her initial discomfort began to fade as she became distracted by the sheer variety of otaku culture on display. There were doujinshi stalls, official merchandise, scale figures, posters, and massive gaming booths. Suddenly, Reina's eyes locked onto a small, brightly decorated booth. A group of staff members were working hard to pitch a specific series to the passing crowd. Star C. At the front of the booth was a massive promotional poster for the novel. The anime-style illustration of the red-haired, red-eyed heroine was displayed prominently for all to see.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.